One might envision strolling through the sun-drenched hills of ancient Corinth on a balmy evening 2.5 millennia ago. A gentle Mediterranean breeze carried the fragrant aroma of olive groves and the distant murmur of waves caressing the rugged coastline. The path led towards the opulent palace of King Sisyphus, a ruler whose name would, unbeknownst to those present, become inextricably linked with a fate both extraordinary and eternally arduous. The legendary punishment of Sisyphus, an endless struggle against a relentless boulder, was a chapter yet to unfold in his storied life. At this juncture, the monarch remained very much a living ruler, presiding over the flourishing city-state of Corinth. His predicament, however, was one few sovereign rulers would confess to, an intellect so sharp it bordered on hubris. Sisyphus had, it seemed, deciphered a secret reserved solely for the gods, a forbidden knowledge that allowed him to circumvent the very grasp of mortality. One might readily conjure the daily routine of a citizen dwelling in Corinth under Sisyphus's dominion. Each dawn would herald the familiar symphony of merchants arranging their wares in the bustling agora, the vibrant heart of the city's commerce. The enticing aroma of freshly baked bread often mingled with the invigorating, briny tang carried inland from the expansive harbor. Here, ships docked with remarkable regularity, their holds laden with exquisite pottery from Athens, luxurious silks from far-flung empires, and captivating narratives brought by seasoned travelers who had traversed the known boundaries of the ancient world. The reigning monarch, Sisyphus, was renowned throughout the Hellenic world for three distinct qualities. Foremost among these was his unparalleled intellect, a mind so exceptionally acute that whispers circulated, suggesting he possessed the cunning to even outmaneuver the Olympian deities themselves. Secondly, his astute leadership had transformed Corinth into an undisputed beacon of prosperity, arguably one of the most affluent city-states across all of Greece. His third notable trait, however, was a more complex one: a certain moral flexibility, a strategic dishonesty that, paradoxically, often yielded collective advantages for his subjects, ensuring that dissent remained largely subdued. On any given morning, Sisyphus could often be seen traversing the vibrant city streets, his stride deliberate and unhurried, a stark contrast to the typical haste of other rulers. He moved not with urgency, but with profound purpose, his gaze absorbing every minute detail: the meticulous arrangement of a merchant's wares, the intricate ballet of cargo being loaded onto vessels at the bustling harbor, even the preferred routes of arriving travelers. His mind was a perpetual engine of thought and stratagem, operating with the intricate precision of a spider weaving an invisible, intricate web, perpetually connecting disparate details that invariably eluded the perception of others. Then, one particular morning, an anomaly disturbed the customary rhythm. A citizen perhaps engaged in the mundane act of purchasing olives from a favored merchant might have noticed a figure cloaked in dark garments moving with an unnerving stillness through the bustling marketplace. This individual neither shopped nor conversed, he simply observed. An inexplicable aura compelled others to instinctively yield him space, a silent deference. Shadows seemed to cling to his form, and conversations faded into hushed whispers in his wake. This enigmatic stranger was none other than Thanatos, the very personification of death, though his true identity remained veiled to mortals. He had arrived in Corinth on a solemn, official commission. A soul was slated to depart that very day, and Thanatos had come to claim it. The profound irony, however, was that the designated individual for this grim summons was none other than the remarkably clever King Sisyphus himself. Yet Sisyphus, true to his formidable reputation, had anticipated this very visitation for an extended period. His exceptional acumen allowed him to discern intricate patterns and subtle rhythms that remained entirely imperceptible to ordinary mortals. He had meticulously observed the delicate nuances of timing, the inexorable unfolding of specific events, and from these observations, a chilling suspicion had solidified. His allotted time might soon be drawing to a close. Consequently, when Thanatos materialized within the palace walls that evening, Sisyphus extended a welcome typically reserved for a cherished, long-absent friend. "Welcome, thrice welcome," the king purportedly declared, gesturing towards the finest vintage and the most luxuriously appointed chair. "You must be weary from your arduous journey. Pray, be seated and find repose." Such an amiable reception was entirely unprecedented for Thanatos. Mortals typically either fled in terror or resignedly embraced their inevitable demise. This unexpected cordiality piqued the curiosity of Death incarnate, who, despite his grim purpose, found himself intrigued by the trajectory this peculiar encounter might take. Settling into the plush seat, Thanatos acknowledged his host with a direct query, surmising that Sisyphus was well aware of his purpose. The wine, he conceded, was indeed exceptional. Sisyphus, ever the master of disarming charm, readily agreed, then launched into a lavish appraisal of Thanatos's cosmic duties. He expressed profound admiration for the precision, the impeccable timing, and the delicate equilibrium maintained by Death in orchestrating countless transitions. Such intricate coordination, he mused, must be staggeringly complex. Thanatos, unaccustomed to such earnest appreciation, found himself nodding in silent agreement, remarking that the complexity of his work and the inherent skill required were seldom acknowledged. He then took another measured sip of the exquisite vintage, permitting the conversation to continue its unusual course. With a feigned innocence, Sisyphus then pressed Thanatos for details regarding the precise mechanics of his celestial duties, professing a lifelong fascination with ingenious contraptions. His gaze then drifted to a set of intricately crafted silver chains adorning a nearby wall. These, he explained, were reputed to be unbreakable, a testament to the skill of their creator. Yet, he pondered aloud, how could such a formidable claim ever truly be put to the test? It was at this critical juncture that Sisyphus's legendary cunning manifested in its most audacious form. Through a masterfully orchestrated blend of intellectual curiosity, artful flattery, and the intoxicating influence of the superb wine, he subtly maneuvered Thanatos into a position where the very embodiment of Death agreed to don the chains. Purely, Sisyphus insisted, for the sake of professional interest, and to verify the smith's bold assertion. The instant those silver links clicked irrevocably shut around Thanatos's wrists, the fabric of existence itself underwent a profound and terrifying alteration. Death, the unstoppable force, was now a captive within Sisyphus's lavish palace, ensnared, and to his evident chagrin, rather embarrassed in a comfortable chair. Thanatos reportedly confessed the situation was awkward, to which Sisyphus, a triumphant smile playing on his lips, retorted that it was perhaps awkward only for his guest, while for himself it proved rather convenient. Thus commenced an era utterly unparalleled in the annals of both Corinth and the wider world. With the personification of death held captive within the royal chambers, mortality itself ceased to exist. In Corinth and across every corner of the globe, the grim reaper's harvest abruptly halted. The elderly, instead of finding their peaceful repose, simply continued to age, their vitality slowly waning without the release of final slumber. Warriors on distant, blood-soaked battlefields sustained wounds that should have been instantly fatal, yet inexplicably continued to fight, their bodies refusing to succumb. A pervasive, unsettling awareness began to ripple through humanity. Something profoundly fundamental had been irrevocably disrupted within the natural order of existence. For Sisyphus, this improbable triumph was, initially, nothing short of perfection. He had accomplished the elusive aspiration secretly harbored by every mortal being. He had vanquished death. His days unfolded in a serene rhythm, presiding over Corinth, indulging in protracted convivial dinners with his beloved wife, Merope, and contemplatively observing the fiery descent of the sun from his palatial balcony. He had, it seemed, won the ultimate cosmic game. Yet the profound truth would soon emerge. Victory, particularly one of such monumental scale, does not always deliver the unadulterated satisfaction one might anticipate. Within a few weeks, Sisyphus began to perceive a peculiar detachment in his captive. Thanatos, despite his ignominious confinement, exhibited no discernible distress. Indeed, he seemed almost to possess a quiet amusement. One evening, Thanatos inquired if the king was enjoying his victory, to which Sisyphus confidently affirmed that he was, thoroughly. However, a subtle inflection in Thanatos's voice instilled a nascent unease in the monarch. "Good, good," Death reportedly mused. "I trust you are savoring this moment, for you must understand that eventually my esteemed colleagues will undoubtedly notice my prolonged absence from my duties. And when they do," Thanatos concluded, his voice trailing off with a chillingly knowing smile, leaving the unspoken consequences to hang heavy in the air. It was then that a profound realization dawned upon Sisyphus. He might have secured a singular battle, but the overarching war remained far from won. The Olympian gods, as it would inevitably prove, possessed a distinct aversion to having their intricate, fundamental cosmic systems disturbed, even by the most ingeniously cunning of mortal kings. Nevertheless, for the present moment, Sisyphus had achieved the utterly impossible. He reclined within his opulent palace, vibrantly alive, having demonstrably outwitted the very embodiment of death. The fading evening light streamed through the grand windows, suffusing the chambers in a warm, ethereal, golden glow. In the distance, the silhouettes of ships navigated their return to the harbor, their sails billowing gently in the day's final breeze. And in his comfortable, yet confining chair, Thanatos waited with an unsettling patience, his silent demeanor a testament to the immutable truth that all mortal victories are inherently ephemeral, and that the true saga of Sisyphus had, in essence, only just commenced. A compelling question then arises: what unfathomable consequences would ensue when the other formidable gods of Olympus inevitably discovered that death itself had vanished? And more profoundly, if a mortal were granted the power to circumvent their own mortality, would such a victory truly taste as sweet as imagined? Or would the triumph eventually lead to a gnawing introspection, much like Sisyphus might now be experiencing, questioning whether some cosmic games are simply too perilous to win? The unfolding narrative of Sisyphus and his extraordinary, unwitting guest undoubtedly leaves one pondering the next dramatic turn of events. 3 weeks had elapsed since Thanatos found himself unwillingly shackled within the opulent confines of the Corinthian palace. The initial surge of exhilaration at the impossible had gradually transmuted into a pervasive, unsettling strangeness, a world where the most elemental and inevitable aspect of existence had simply ceased. Each morning dawned upon this altered reality, where death had, in effect, embarked upon an unanticipated cosmic sabbatical. Initially, the profound implications of this cosmic disruption largely escaped immediate notice. Death, after all, was not an event that touched every individual on a daily basis. Yet, slowly, inexorably, a disquieting awareness began to permeate society. An undeniable fundamental alteration had occurred. The venerable proprietor of the local pottery shop, who had endured a debilitating cough for many months, continued to cough. But his condition, to everyone's bewilderment, failed to worsen. A woman who had suffered a calamitous fall from her rooftop the previous week, sustaining injuries that should have proven unequivocally fatal, was now seen ambulating. Albeit with agonizing slowness, her body riddled with broken bones that stubbornly refused to yield to the cessation of life. Her primary complaint, ironically, was merely the profound inconvenience of her predicament. One might initially perceive such an existence as an idyllic utopia, an end to grief, an end to loss, the painful farewells to cherished loved ones forever banished. However, as the days unfolded, it became increasingly apparent that immortality was not the unmitigated blessing it first appeared to be. To truly grasp the unsettling reality, one might consider a typical day unfolding within this death-free world. A Corinthian citizen might awaken in their modest dwelling near the bustling marketplace, greeted by the familiar symphony of dawn, the industrious clatter of merchants preparing their stalls, the joyous shouts of children at play in the narrow streets, and the perpetual, soothing murmur of waves against the distant harbor. Superficially, all seemed normal. Yet, upon visiting the local baker for the morning's fresh bread, a peculiar sight would greet them. The baker's grandfather, who had languished in a state of severe illness for months, was now inexplicably on his feet, feebly assisting in the shop. His movements were painstakingly slow, his breathing audibly labored, and his eyes held a profound weariness that transcended mere lack of sleep. He continued to work for the simple, horrifying reason that he could not, apparently, die. An inquiring customer might pose a polite question about the grandfather's well-being. The baker, casting a weary glance towards the struggling old man, would offer a resigned shrug. He might explain that his grandfather should have found peaceful release weeks prior, but now remained stuck, an agonizing burden for which his family had no solution. The old man endured constant pain, yet the solace of rest was perpetually denied him. This, then, revealed the grim, unforeseen consequence of Sisyphus's audacious triumph. Without death, suffering did not conclude. Instead, it merely persisted, an endless torment. The fundamental, natural rhythm that allowed the aged to find their final repose and gracefully make way for the burgeoning vitality of the young had been catastrophically disrupted. Up in the opulent royal residence, King Sisyphus was observed partaking in his morning libations, sharing the repast with Thanatos, who, though still held captive by his bonds, displayed a surprisingly articulate and engaging demeanor. Over the preceding weeks, an unusual custom had taken root between them. Sisyphus would dutifully provide Thanatos with sustenance and drink, and in return, their discussions would traverse the intricate landscapes of philosophical thought, the machinations of political power, and the profound, often perplexing, mechanisms of human mortality. With a gentle pour of wine into both their chalices, Sisyphus posed a contemplative query. Do you not find the perpetual nature of your duties somewhat tiresome? The endless collection of mortal souls, day after day, through countless centuries. Thanatos, ever reflective, pondered the king's inquiry, his gaze momentarily falling upon his restraints, which, he conceded inwardly, were indeed crafted with remarkable artistry. One might find it astonishing, Thanatos mused, but each individual confronts the inevitability of their demise with a distinct and often unexpected resolve. Some wage fierce battles against it, others embrace it with quiet resignation, and still others endeavor to negotiate their fate. It is, I assure you, a remarkably diverse and perpetually engaging endeavor. Sisyphus then inquired, "And what of your current occupation?" To which Thanatos replied, "Presently I am enjoying the company of an exceptionally astute monarch, sharing a fine vintage and observing the gradual dawning of a profound realization across the mortal realm, that perhaps the cessation of life is not, in fact, an inherently dreadful prospect. Indeed, tidings of an unsettling nature were beginning to propagate from the far-flung regions of Greece, converging upon the city-state of Corinth. A courier bearing disquieting reports arrived, instilling a palpable sense of unease among the populace. In the bustling polis of Athens, a venerable woman had languished for a full week beneath the debris of a collapsed edifice, her physical form ravaged, yet inexplicably denied the release of death. Concurrently, in the martial society of Sparta, warriors engaged in sanguinary conflicts, where every participant sustained grievous, often fatal wounds, yet none succumbed. The battlefields, once grim theaters of finality, now teemed with combatants who, by all natural laws, should have been deceased. Yet they continued their ferocious struggle, their bodies bearing sword cuts that would ordinarily be instantaneously lethal. The meticulously balanced cosmic order, it seemed, was systematically unraveling, giving rise to a cascade of unforeseen and deeply problematic consequences. However, the true genesis of widespread consternation commenced when these extraordinary reports ascended to the lofty heights of Mount Olympus. The Olympian deities, it must be noted, had been thoroughly absorbed in their own celestial machinations and had not immediately discerned the complete cessation of their painstakingly orchestrated cosmic apparatus. Nevertheless, eventually, Hades, the formidable sovereign of the underworld, registered a distinct anomaly, an uncharacteristic dearth of newly departed souls for a considerable duration. Initially, he attributed this lull to a mere transient phase, perhaps an unprecedented period of tranquility and robust health pervading the mortal sphere. Yet, as days transmuted into weeks without any fresh arrivals, his suspicions were piqued, compelling him to initiate a thorough investigation. And it was upon his startling discovery of Thanatos's conspicuous absence that events, as they say, truly began to acquire an intriguing dimension. Back in the bustling city of Corinth, as you, the observer, went about your customary daily tasks, an unsettling phenomenon seized your attention, sending a chill through your very being. The sky, which moments before had been a vibrant azure and utterly unblemished, abruptly plunged into an ominous darkness, not with the familiar gathering of storm clouds, but with an entirely different, more profound alteration. The very atmosphere seemed to congeal, thick with an almost tangible manifestation of divine indignation. Sisyphus, ensconced within the confines of his palatial abode, also perceived this profound shift. He was seated opposite Thanatos, indulging in what had become their habitual afternoon libation, when the ambient temperature within the chamber experienced a precipitous and unmistakable decline. "I surmise," Thanatos remarked with an almost unnerving mildness, "that would signify the arrival of Ares." Sisyphus, striving to maintain an outward composure, endeavored to steady his voice. "The formidable god of war. He is, by all accounts, particularly incensed by the recent complications plaguing the battlefields. Hades, I presume, dispatched him to ascertain the cause. And, as if on cue, the grand palace doors, without human intervention, burst violently inward. Into the resplendent chamber strode Ares, the formidable god of war, his countenance a testament to profound displeasure. He was a figure of imposing stature, broad-shouldered, clad in armor that possessed the uncanny property of absorbing ambient light rather than reflecting it, rendering his presence even more formidable. His eyes blazed with an incandescent fury, a reflection of 1,000 battles fought and won. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice a thunderous pronouncement. Sisyphus, to his considerable credit, did not immediately succumb to panic. He rose slowly, executed a deferential bow, and with an unperturbed gesture, indicated a nearby chair. "Lord Ares, a most gracious welcome to my humble palace. Might I prevail upon you to partake in some wine?" Ares's piercing gaze swept from the shackled form of Thanatos to Sisyphus, then back to Thanatos, a profound incredulity etched upon his divine features. "Are you, in all seriousness, extending an offer of wine while simultaneously holding Death himself captive?" "Well," Sisyphus responded with an air of disarming reasonableness, "it seemed the most appropriate and courteous course of action." For a fleeting instant, Ares was so utterly dumbfounded by the sheer, unmitigated audacity of this retort that he found himself momentarily bereft of speech. Here stood a mere mortal monarch, who had somehow managed to ensnare the very embodiment of death, thereby plunging the entire cosmic order into an unprecedented state of disarray. And yet he was offering refreshments as if this were merely a casual social call. However, Ares, a deity of swift action, rapidly regained his composure. With a gesture that appeared deceptively casual, yet was infused with the potent force of divine power, he effortlessly shattered the chains that bound Thanatos. The silver links scattered across the polished floor, resembling nothing so much as glistening droplets of water. "My sincere gratitude," Thanatos murmured, stretching his liberated arms with a palpable sense of relief. Those had, I must confess, become rather irksome. Sisyphus observed the dissolution of his cunning triumph unfolding before his very eyes. Yet even in this moment of apparent defeat, even when confronted by the overwhelming wrath of the Olympian gods, his intellect remained keenly engaged. For Sisyphus, it must be understood, was never truly finished with his intricate stratagems. "Shukti, before you claim me," he addressed Thanatos, his voice remarkably steady, "might I be permitted to request one small favor?" Both deities regarded him with undisguised astonishment. Most mortals, when facing their imminent demise after such an audacious and sacrilegious deception, typically resorted to desperate pleas for clemency or futile attempts at flight. They certainly did not proffer requests for favors. "What manner of favor do you seek?" Thanatos inquired, his curiosity piqued despite himself. And it was precisely at this juncture that Sisyphus artfully sprung his subsequent snare. For even though he had unequivocally lost this particular skirmish, his mind was already calculating 3 moves ahead. The game, as far as he was concerned, was unequivocally far from its conclusion. As the twilight descended upon Corinth, and the natural order of existence gradually began its process of reasserting itself across the entirety of the world, individuals everywhere perceived a subtle, yet profound, shift. The venerable grandfather of the old potter, after a long and arduous life, finally closed his eyes, finding the peace that had long eluded him. The grievously wounded warriors on distant, blood-soaked battlefields at last received the profound rest that had been so cruelly denied to them. The unfortunate woman, trapped beneath the collapsed structure in Athens, was finally released from her prolonged and agonizing suffering. Death had, indeed, returned to the mortal realm, as intrinsically natural and profoundly necessary as the very act of breathing. And yet somehow, one harbored the distinct impression that Sisyphus's intricate narrative with death was not yet entirely concluded. After all, a man endowed with the singular cleverness to ensnare death itself undoubtedly possessed more than a singular stratagem concealed within his cunning intellect. One might ponder the precise nature of that enigmatic favor, and how, one might further speculate, would the formidable Olympian deities react when the full realization dawned upon them that Sisyphus, even in his apparent vanquishment, might still be engaged in a complex game whose rules they did not yet fully comprehend. Sometimes, the most perilous adversaries are precisely those who maintain an unwavering composure, even when their current position appears to be one of undeniable defeat. One should recall that specific favor Sisyphus implored, uttered just as Thanatos stood poised to claim him. Well, that seemingly innocuous request is poised to fundamentally reconfigure everything one believed to be true concerning the cunning monarch of Corinth. One might envision oneself standing within the sun-dappled palace courtyard the following morning. The air, crisp and invigorating, carried the fragrant essence of olive groves commingled with the distant, briny scent of the sea. One might reasonably anticipate discovering the palace enveloped in an atmosphere of profound mourning, adorned with somber black draperies, its servants openly weeping for their fallen sovereign. Instead, one is confronted with a scene far more perplexing. The palace, in every discernible aspect, appears entirely unremarkable. There are no mourning garments, no overt preparations for a funeral, no grief-stricken queen. In point of fact, Queen Merope is observed meticulously attending to her daily responsibilities, conducting herself as if absolutely nothing out of the ordinary had transpired. She is engaged in discussions concerning menu planning with the head cook, meticulously reviewing intricate trade agreements with various merchants, and generally comporting herself as a woman whose beloved husband is very much alive and well. However, herein lies the crucial enigma. Sisyphus is unequivocally not alive. Thanatos did, in point of undeniable fact, claim him. One witnessed it with one's own eyes, or at the very least, one observed the formidable god of death escorting the king away into that shadowy, ethereal realm where all mortals are ultimately destined to journey. So why, then, is his royal consort acting as if he has merely stepped out for a casual promenade? To fully grasp the unfolding events, it becomes imperative to revisit that pivotal favor Sisyphus so cunningly requested. When confronted with the inexorable reality of their impending demise, the vast majority of mortals typically implore for an extension of time, for divine mercy, or for a final opportunity to bid farewell. Sisyphus, however, petitioned for something far more precise, and as subsequent events would reveal, infinitely more ingenious. "Before I accompany you," he articulated to Thanatos, "I wish to ensure that my earthly affairs are meticulously in order. You comprehend, do you not? I am, after all, a king. Weighty responsibilities attend my station." Thanatos, who had, quite recently, endured several weeks in ignominious captivity thanks to Sisyphus's elaborate machinations, was, understandably, imbued with a heightened sense of circumspection. "What, precisely, do you signify by affairs?" "Nothing of a dramatic nature," Sisyphus reassured him with an air of deceptive nonchalance. "Merely a brief conversation with my esteemed wife, explicit instructions regarding my funeral rites, and the proper ceremonial observances. You are, I am certain, fully aware of the profound significance of these matters. And indeed, funeral rites held an immense and sacred importance in the societal fabric of ancient Greece. Without the meticulous performance of the prescribed ceremonies, a departed soul could not attain peace or find its proper repose within the underworld. Even the formidable Olympian deities accorded profound respect to this deeply ingrained tradition. Consequently, Thanatos reluctantly consented to permit Sisyphus a final colloquy with his wife prior to his ultimate departure. What transpired next was the pivotal conversation between King Sisyphus and Queen Merope. Yet, it was not the melancholic exchange one might anticipate between a husband and wife facing an eternal separation. "Listen with utmost attentiveness," Sisyphus instructed her, his voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, ensuring that Thanatos remained oblivious to their true discourse. "And when my demise inevitably occurs, and it will occur very shortly, you must, under no circumstances, perform the customary funeral rites." Merope's brow furrowed in profound confusion. "What precisely do you mean by that? No funeral pyre, no ritualistic offerings to the gods, no placement of coins upon my eyes for the ferryman Charon. Absolutely nothing. Allow everyone to simply assume that you are merely forgetful regarding these crucial matters." "But without the proper rites," Merope protested, "your soul will be condemned to wander, trapped between worlds." "Precisely," Sisyphus affirmed, a knowing smile playing upon his lips, a smile that invariably signified he was at least 3 strategic steps ahead of everyone else. "You must trust me implicitly on this." Thus, when Thanatos ultimately led Sisyphus away into the shadowy depths of the underworld, Queen Merope meticulously adhered to her husband's extraordinary instructions. She resumed her daily routine with an outward semblance of normalcy. She initiated no funeral preparations whatsoever. She conducted herself as if her husband had simply embarked upon an extended business journey and would, in due course, return upon the completion of his tasks. Now, let us trace the subsequent trajectory of Sisyphus within the spectral domain of the deceased. The underworld, it is crucial to understand, is not the infernal realm of fiery torment depicted in some popular narratives. It is rather more akin to a vast monochromatic bureaucracy, an endless labyrinth of chambers and passageways where disembodied souls are systematically processed, subjected to judgment, and subsequently assigned to their designated eternal accommodations. Sisyphus, upon his arrival, is directed, like all recently deceased souls, towards the desolate banks of the river Styx. Here, he's expected to proffer payment to Charon, the ancient ferryman, in the form of 2 coins for passage across the murky waters of the river. These requisite coins should have been reverently placed upon his eyes during his funeral rites. But of course, there were no funeral rites. Consequently, Sisyphus possesses no coins. My deepest apologies, the newly deceased monarch conveyed to Charon, the ancient ferryman of the Styx, but there appears to have been a significant oversight. My devoted spouse was entrusted with arranging the proper funerary payment, yet it seems to have slipped her mind entirely. Charon, a venerable figure who had diligently transported countless souls across the river Acheron for millennia, had witnessed every conceivable scenario. However, encountering a departed individual whose kin had simply neglected the requisite burial rites was sufficiently extraordinary to pose a considerable predicament. Without the prescribed fare, I am unable to convey you to the other side, Charon articulated with immutable finality. Such are the established regulations. Indeed, Sisyphus promptly affirmed, feigning profound comprehension. I grasped the gravity of the situation entirely. Rules, after all, are sacrosanct. Nevertheless, might there not be an appropriate authority with whom I could consult regarding this matter? Perhaps an avenue for administrative review. Thus, Sisyphus found himself navigating what amounted to the underworld's intricate and labyrinthine bureaucratic complaint department. He was meticulously redirected from one lesser functionary to another, each perplexed official grappling with the unprecedented challenge of a soul whose progression to judgment was technically impeded due to the unobserved solemnities. Inevitably, this perplexing affair ascended to the attention of Hades himself. The formidable sovereign of the netherworld was engaged in the customary review of the day's voluminous parchment when a nervous aide cautiously approached his obsidian throne. "My esteemed lord," the aide began, his voice barely a whisper, "we are confronted with an exceedingly unusual circumstance. A particular soul awaits, unable to be processed, for his essential funeral rites were never properly executed." Hades, pausing his meticulous examination of the documents, lifted his gaze. "Never performed, you say? That is truly peculiar. What account does this soul offer for such an astonishing omission?" "He asserts his wife simply forgot, my lord." "He appears quite distressed by the whole unfortunate incident." Now, Hades was certainly not a deity easily deluded. Having presided over the underworld for untold eons, he possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every conceivable stratagem mortals might attempt. Yet this particular situation was genuinely without precedent. The notion of a wife neglecting to perform the solemn funeral rites for her deceased husband struck him as so profoundly improbable that it might, ironically, hold a kernel of truth. When Sisyphus was at last ushered into the imposing presence of the throne, he presented his carefully constructed narrative with an air of impeccable sincerity. He eloquently expressed profound shock and deep dismay that his cherished Merope could have exhibited such apparent negligence. He voiced anxieties regarding the potential implications of this oversight for the sanctity of their marital bond, and lamented the considerable scandal this unprecedented lapse would undoubtedly ignite back in the illustrious city of Corinth. This entire affair is profoundly disquieting, he imparted to Hades, his voice tinged with feigned sorrow. My poor Merope must be utterly consumed by grief. That, I surmise, is the very reason she overlooked the necessary rites. Her mind, I fear, is far from clear. Hades meticulously scrutinized this singularly unusual mortal. There was an elusive quality about Sisyphus that sparked a sense of familiarity, though the god could not quite pinpoint its origin. And what, pray tell, would you propose as a resolution to this peculiar predicament? Sisyphus responded with a thoughtful, almost hesitant demeanor. Well, my lord, I suppose it would necessitate someone journeying back to Corinth to gently remind my wife of her solemn duties, to ensure the proper ceremonies are at last performed. But who, I wonder, possesses the capacity for such a remarkable undertaking? Are you suggesting, Hades began, but Sisyphus swiftly interjected, Oh, I could never presume to offer a suggestion to a deity, my lord. However, if a benevolent power were to temporarily reinstate me to the realm of the living, merely long enough to rectify this unfortunate administrative error, I would be eternally indebted. And it was at this precise juncture that Hades committed the very miscalculation Sisyphus had so artfully engineered. Confronted with an unprecedented bureaucratic anomaly and presented with what appeared to be a remarkably logical and reasonable solution, the formidable god of the underworld granted Sisyphus temporary dispensation to return to life and personally oversee the arrangement of his own funeral. 3 days, Hades emphatically pronounced. You are afforded 3 days to ensure the proper rites are meticulously performed. Thereafter, you are to return here without delay. Of course, my lord, Sisyphus replied, his voice brimming with feigned deference. 3 days will be more than amply sufficient. And so, Sisyphus found himself miraculously restored to the vibrant world of the living, ostensibly for a mere 3 days. His supposed mission, solely to orchestrate his own posthumous ceremonies. One can readily surmise the degree of earnestness with which he regarded these divine stipulations. As he strode through the grand palace doors that very evening, Queen Merope greeted him with a smile that failed to entirely mask her palpable apprehension. How did it transpire? She inquired, her voice laced with nervous anticipation. Perfectly, Sisyphus declared, a subtle glint in his eyes, though I suspect we may have a considerable amount of explaining to do in a few days' time. As the majestic sun descended below the horizon of Corinth, painting the vast sky in opulent hues of molten gold and fiery crimson, Sisyphus stood upon his palace balcony, undeniably alive in a world from which he ought to have been irrevocably departed. The gentle Mediterranean breeze carried the familiar, comforting symphony of his thriving city, the calls of merchants concluding their daily transactions, the distant echoes of children being summoned indoors for their evening repast, and the rhythmic murmur of waves caressing the harbor walls. He had, against all odds, achieved the impossible once more. He had not merely evaded the clutches of death, he had, with audacious cunning, persuaded Death's sovereign to courteously escort him back to the realm of the living. Yet, as he observed the nascent stars beginning to emerge within the deepening twilight, Sisyphus might have entertained a fleeting suspicion that perhaps he had grown a touch too ingenious for his own ultimate well-being. After all, the Olympian deities possessed an extraordinarily long memory, and they harbored a profound disdain for being made to appear foolish. One might ponder the events that transpired once those 3 allotted days had elapsed. And what course of action would an individual pursue if granted such an extraordinary, albeit temporary, reprieve from the very embrace of death? Would the sacred agreement be honored? Or would the temptation to ascertain the absolute limits of one's fortune prove irresistible? Those 3 days Hades so magnanimously granted Sisyphus, well, they transpired precisely as one might anticipate from the legendary king renowned for having once dared to shackle death itself. Envision yourself strolling through the bustling streets of Corinth a full 6 months after Sisyphus was unequivocally mandated to return to the underworld. The morning market is a vibrant tableau of its customary frenetic activity. Eloquent merchants are passionately extolling the virtues of their diverse wares, while carefree children engage in spirited games amidst the cobblestone thoroughfares. And there, with an air of discerning connoisseurship, meticulously examining some particularly exquisite pottery at one of the bustling stalls, stands King Sisyphus, undeniably alive, and evidently relishing his vastly extended sabbatical from the grim dominion of death. Indeed, when those initial 3 days had irrevocably expired, Sisyphus stumbled upon a most astonishing revelation. He discerned that no divine emissary was dispatched to retrieve him. Apparently, the intricate bureaucratic machinery of the underworld operated in certain extraordinary instances pertaining to temporary resurrections, upon a rather naive system of honor. The gods had, quite simply, expected his prompt and voluntary return as promised. This, as one can readily surmise, constituted a grave miscalculation on their part. Sisyphus consequently dedicated those ensuing months to precisely what he most ardently cherished, sagaciously governing his flourishing polis, luxuriating in the boundless joys of existence, and basking in an immense, self-satisfied pride for having so brilliantly outmaneuvered the formidable gods. Not merely once, nor twice, but now a remarkable 3 times. He had audacious chained Thanatos, ingeniously convinced Hades to sanction his return to the mortal coil, and then, with unparalleled audacity, had simply chosen to remain. However, divine patience, while undeniably vast and enduring, is not without its ultimate limits. And eventually, the vigilant deities observed that their temporary resurrection had, quite unequivocally, transmuted into a decidedly permanent fixture. The second time they dispatched an envoy for Sisyphus, they did not deign to send Thanatos, the personification of death. They eschewed any pretense of due process or cumbersome bureaucratic protocols. This time, their chosen emissary was Hermes, the swift and cunning messenger god, armed with exceedingly precise and uncompromising directives. Retrieve Sisyphus immediately, employing any and all necessary means, and deliver him without further ado to the underworld, his rightful and overdue abode. Hermes materialized within the opulent palace throne room on a Tuesday morning, precisely as Sisyphus was meticulously reviewing a stack of critical trade agreements. There was no ostentatious ingress, no dramatic peals of thunder or overt supernatural manifestations. One moment, the expansive chamber was devoid of all save the king, and the very next, a youthful figure clad in unassuming traveler's attire stood with quiet authority beside the royal throne. Sisyphus, Hermes articulated pleasantly, his voice carrying an understated weight. You are tardy. Sisyphus, without looking up from his intricate scrolls, inquired, Tardy for what, precisely? Your prearranged appointment with eternity. You were unequivocally designated to return to the underworld a full 6 months ago. Ah, all that, Sisyphus responded with a dismissive wave of his hand. Yes, I have been meaning to attend to that particular matter. However, I have been most dreadfully preoccupied with pressing royal duties, you comprehend. Perhaps next week would prove more opportune. Hermes offered a faint smile, yet it was conspicuously devoid of genuine warmth. I regret to inform you that next week will not be amenable to any party involved. We are departing forthwith. And this time, there was absolutely no scope for negotiation or further delay. Hermes simply extended a hand and lightly touched Sisyphus upon the shoulder. In that instant, the king found himself instantaneously transported, now standing once more within the austere throne room of Hades, confronting a deity whose patience had demonstrably dwindled to a considerably lower ebb than during their initial encounter. Sisyphus, Hades intoned, his voice resonating with the immense gravitas of countless ages, we are compelled to engage in a rather serious discourse. The formidable throne room of the underworld was assuredly not conceived with any notion of mortal comfort in mind. Its imposing walls, hewn from obsidian stone, appeared to absorb every vestige of light, rather than reflecting it. The ambient air was perpetually cool and utterly still, carrying no discernible trace of the vibrant aromas or vital energies of the living world above. When Hades spoke, his pronouncements seemed to linger in the frigid air, their echoes persisting for an unnaturally extended duration. You dared to shackle my esteemed colleague Thanatos, Hades continued, his voice steadily intensifying, thereby disrupting the natural cosmic order for an egregious period of weeks. You then cunningly beguiled me into granting you a temporary resurrection, only to brazenly disregard your sacred obligation to return. This unprecedented level of audacious creativity cannot and will not be permitted to persist. Sisyphus, even in the face of the unadulterated displeasure emanating from the god of death, remarkably maintained his characteristic composure. I fully comprehend your frustration, my lord. Perhaps we might yet devise some mutually agreeable arrangement. No, Hades declared with unwavering finality. There will be no more arrangements, no further negotiations, absolutely no more deceptive stratagems. You so vehemently desired to evade death. Very well then, you shall receive precisely what you so ardently sought. And it was at this poignant juncture that Sisyphus came to a profound and agonizing realization. Sometimes, attaining the precise object of one, as desires can, in fact, culminate in the most dreadful conceivable outcome. Hades executed a simple, decisive gesture, and suddenly Sisyphus found himself abruptly relocated to a desolate expanse unlike any other he had previously encountered within the vast dominion of the underworld. It was a bleak mountainside, starkly rocky and utterly barren, stretching interminably upwards into a perpetually gray, oppressive sky. At his very feet lay a colossal boulder, not gargantuan in its dimensions, yet undeniably massive enough to present an exceedingly formidable challenge to any attempt at movement. The stone itself was perfectly spherical, its surface rendered unnaturally smooth by the relentless erosion of countless eons of ceaseless wind and unforgiving weather. This, Hades announced, his voice echoing with chilling finality, is now your eternal domicile. And this, Sisyphus, is your new perpetual task. You shall exert yourself to push this immense boulder to the very pinnacle of this mountain, Only when you have successfully attained the summit may you at last find respite. Sisyphus intently observed the colossal stone, then cast his gaze upon the formidable mountain, before his eyes returned to the imposing figure of Hades. His initial assessment was surprisingly understated. That doesn't sound overly punitive, frankly. A measure of physical exertion might prove quite salutary for me, he commented. Ah, but there is one crucial detail, Hades interjected, a chilling smile, entirely devoid of genuine warmth, spreading across his countenance. The boulder is enchanted. Each and every time you approach the mountain's crest, it will inevitably plummet back down to the base, compelling you to recommence your arduous endeavor. For the first time in his remarkably protracted and cunning existence, Sisyphus found himself utterly speechless. For all eternity, Hades appended, ensuring the gravity of the pronouncement was unequivocally clear. You desired to circumvent death. Congratulations. You shall never perish. You are simply condemned to propel this immense rock up this mountain for an unending perpetuity. With those final chilling words, Hades dissipated, abandoning Sisyphus on the desolate mountainside with his monumental burden and the horrifying dawning of what true, inescapable retribution truly signifies. On the inaugural day of his infernal labor, Sisyphus approached the monumental task with his characteristic self-assurance. He internally questioned the true difficulty of the undertaking. After all, he possessed a sharp intellect, an inventive spirit, and a proven track record of resolving seemingly insurmountable dilemmas. Placing his formidable shoulder against the immense stone, he initiated the relentless ascent. The boulder, though undeniably heavy, did not present an impossible obstacle. The mountain's gradient was steep, yet his physical fortitude was considerable. With methodical determination, progressing step by laborious step, foot by aching foot, and hour after grueling hour, he steadily gained elevation along the arduous slope. The monumental stone glided with surprising fluidity over the rugged terrain. His sinews tautened, perspiration cascaded down his visage, but his unwavering progress towards the distant pinnacle was undeniable. As the relentless hours wore on, Sisyphus found his thoughts meandering, traversing the expanse of his past existence, dwelling upon his beloved city of Corinth, his devoted consort Merope, and the intricate tapestry of ingenious stratagems that had ultimately culminated in his present plight. Paradoxically, the sheer physical exertion proved to be somewhat therapeutic. It offered his perpetually restless intellect a singular, uncomplicated objective upon which to concentrate its energies. As what he conjectured to be the approach of dusk, despite the peculiar distortion of temporal perception in this nether realm, Sisyphus could discern the summit drawing ever closer. Merely a few more paces, a final surge of strength. His lower limbs throbbed with fatigue. His dorsal muscles protested with soreness. Yet, the sweet taste of triumph felt tantalizingly close. He mustered his remaining reserves, imparting one conclusive, formidable thrust to the colossal stone, which then majestically surmounted the mountain's apex. For a fleeting instant, Sisyphus remained poised upon the pinnacle, his breath coming in ragged gasps, yet imbued with a profound sense of accomplishment. He had, against all odds, achieved his goal. Even amidst the grim reality of perpetual damnation, he had ingeniously discovered a path to success. His intellect, he concluded, remained superior to the estimation of the divine powers. Then, with an inexorable momentum, the immense boulder commenced its precipitous descent down the opposing face of the mountain. Initially, he harbored a desperate hope of intercepting it. He sprinted in pursuit of the plummeting stone, extending his arms in a desperate attempt to grasp it, to arrest its downward trajectory. But the colossal rock accelerated with terrifying speed, ricocheting and careening down the rugged incline, utterly beyond his capacity to control. Sisyphus observed his entire day's arduous toil vanish into oblivion within a mere handful of minutes. The stone continued its relentless plunge to the very base of the mountain, ultimately coming to rest precisely in the identical location from which he had embarked that very morning. It was at this crushing juncture that a profound comprehension dawned upon him. This retribution transcended mere punishment for his myriad deceptions and intricate machinations. This was a torment meticulously crafted for an individual of his particular disposition, for one who reveled in the challenge of problem-solving, in the discovery of ingenious remedies, in the conquest of contests deemed insurmountable by others. The true malevolence resided not within the physical strain, but rather within the insidious allure of hope. Each successive day, he would be compelled to propel the colossal boulder up the formidable mountain. Each day, he would achieve tangible headway, savoring the gratifying sensation of nearing his objective. Each day, he would attain the apex and briefly bask in a fleeting instant of victory. And each day, he would be forced to witness that hard-won triumph dissolve into utter insignificance as the stone inexorably cascaded back down. As Sisyphus deliberately descended the mountain's face, preparing to recommence his Sisyphean toil, he grasped the profound irony. The divine powers had engineered the quintessential retribution for a mortal who dared to believe he could circumvent destiny itself. They had, in essence, bestowed upon him precisely what he had perpetually craved, an interminable ordeal, an everlasting contest to engage in. The singular, insurmountable flaw lay in the undeniable fact that it was a game he could never, under any circumstances, emerge victorious from. Yet there exists an intriguing characteristic inherent to Sisyphus, an element that the deities perhaps did not entirely factor into their meticulous design of his torment. He was, fundamentally, an individual who derived profound satisfaction from unwavering tenacity, from persevering even when confronted with overwhelming adversity. And as he positioned his shoulder against the colossal stone for the subsequent attempt, a subtle defiance flickered within his countenance, hinting that he remained far from utterly vanquished. Indeed, eternity stretches boundlessly, and a man cunning enough to shackle death itself might, in time, unearth some semblance of contentment, some discreet triumph, a personal victory, even within the most flawlessly conceived divine punishment. One might ponder the intricate thoughts occupying Sisyphus's mind as he embarks upon that subsequent, ceaseless ascent of the formidable mountain. Furthermore, how would one choose to orient their focus if confronted with an insurmountable task, destined for perpetual repetition? It is often posited that the most profound triumphs are those that remain imperceptible to the external observer. Concurrently, as Sisyphus endures his unending existence propelling a colossal stone up a precipitous incline, the vibrant metropolis of Corinth persists in its daily rhythms, albeit without his direct governance. Nevertheless, the urban landscape he bequeathed bears the indelible imprints of his idiosyncratic reign, manifesting in both overt and understated ways. Envision strolling through the bustling thoroughfares of Corinth on an ordinary morning, perhaps approximately a year subsequent to Sisyphus's definitive vanishing. The city, far from ceasing its operations, continues to thrive. Indeed, it functions with an enhanced efficiency, yet an intangible essence pervades the atmosphere, an inherent characteristic that distinguishes Corinth from its Hellenic counterparts. Your day commences at the Agora, the vibrant marketplace that constitutes the pulsating core of the urban center. The mercantile inhabitants of this locale possess a distinctive renown across the entirety of Greece. They are celebrated for their extraordinary acumen in commercial dialogues, for their singular capacity to forge resolutions to dilemmas that confound merchants from rival city-states, and for an almost preternatural knack for transmogrifying perceived liabilities into lucrative gains. Consider, for instance, Marcus, the esteemed purveyor of ceramics. He is currently elucidating to a visitor from Athens why his collection of vases, each bearing a minor fissure, are in fact intrinsically more precious than unblemished earthenware. Observe closely. Marcus articulates, tracing the hairline fracture with his digit. This delicate demarcation illustrates the clay's arduous passage through the fiery crucible. It serves as irrefutable evidence that the vessel has undergone rigorous trial and emerged resilient. A pot devoid of such distinguishing characteristics has, regrettably, yet to experience genuine testing. The Athenian patron's expression initially conveys disbelief, yet inexplicably, by the conclusion of their exchange, he finds himself remitting an augmented sum for the ostensibly flawed pottery, expressing gratitude to Marcus for his enlightening discourse. This exemplifies quintessential Corinthian commercial artistry, the inherent aptitude for recontextualizing any imperfection as an advantageous attribute, any setback as a fortuitous prospect. It is a proficiency the city's traders assimilated through prolonged observation of their monarch. Sisyphus possessed an unparalleled talent for compelling individuals to perceive circumstances from entirely novel perspectives, and that distinctive aptitude became intrinsically woven into the very fabric of the city's cultural identity. Proceeding further through the bustling marketplace, one discerns yet another unequivocally Corinthian characteristic, the distinctive methodology employed by its populace in confronting challenges. Should the baker's essential oven malfunction, rather than merely soliciting a conventional repair, he ingeniously fabricates a makeshift apparatus utilizing an arrangement of mirrors and focused sunlight to sustain the production of bread. Similarly, upon the arrival of a vessel laden with freight exceeding the capacity of standard hoisting mechanisms, the agile dock workers ingeniously conceive a sophisticated pulley system, repurposing the ship's inherent masts. These improvised solutions are not invariably superior to orthodox methods. Indeed, they occasionally manifest as more intricate. However, they are unequivocally products of imaginative thought, emerging from a societal ethos that cultivated the practice of circumventing impediments rather than directly confronting them. Within the regal confines of the palace, Queen Merope has assumed the mantle of Corinth's daily governance. She has unequivocally demonstrated herself to be a monarch of considerable merit in her own capacity, notwithstanding that her administrative philosophy is markedly more unembellished than that of her erstwhile spouse. When she presides over the negotiation of commercial treaties, For example, her pronouncements within the contractual stipulations are precisely what they purport to be. This unadulterated veracity has necessitated a considerable period of adaptation for Corinth's established trading confederates, who had become thoroughly accustomed to Sisyphus's rather more pliant exegesis of documented accords. A notable cohort of merchants hailing from external city-states have expressed genuine delight upon ascertaining that when Queen Merope pledges the conveyance of 100 amphoras of premium olive oil, she unfailingly furnishes precisely 100 amphoras of premium olive oil, rather than a mere 97 amphoras accompanied by an elaborate exposition detailing how the deficit of 3 amphoras is mathematically congruent to 100, given the purportedly exceptional intrinsic quality of the commodity. Nevertheless, the pervasive impact of Sisyphus has not entirely dissipated. The city's nascent generations, for instance, are nurtured upon narratives recounting the exploits of their former sovereign. Yet, these are not conventional sagas of heroic derring-do. Rather, they are chronicles extolling astuteness, the discovery of unforeseen resolutions, and the paramount significance of strategic foresight. Should one frequent the educational establishment where juvenile Corinthians acquire literacy and numeracy, one might overhear the pedagogue recounting the tale of how Sisyphus persuaded a competing monarch to exchange his finest equine stock for an assemblage of mules, by artfully asserting that mules, owing to their partial asinine lineage, demonstrably possessed superior cognitive faculties to horses and were consequently of greater intrinsic worth. The impressionable youngsters are captivated by these anecdotes, not because they endorse duplicity, but because they venerate intellectual prowess and inventive thought. They are thus instructed that myriad approaches often exist for problem resolution, and that the most apparent remedy is not invariably the most efficacious. This pervasive cultural veneration of ingenuity yields tangible practical advantages. Corinth's skilled engineers are celebrated across the Hellenic world for their pioneering methodologies in construction. The city's expansive harbor, a significant undertaking initiated and completed during Sisyphus's tenure, employs an intricate network of diverted aquatic currents that effectively maintains sufficient water depth for substantial maritime vessels, thereby obviating the necessity for perpetual dredging, an engineering marvel that utterly perplexed specialists from other urban centers until subjected to meticulous examination. The Corinthian armed forces, similarly, exhibit pronounced indicators of Sisyphus's enduring impact. Instead of exclusively depending upon brute strength and martial valor, Corinthian legionaries are rigorously schooled in tactical deliberation. They are instructed to exploit geographical features to their strategic benefit, to discern the vulnerabilities of their adversaries, and to secure military engagements through astute planning rather than sheer, overwhelming might. A visiting Spartan general once remarked with a reluctant admiration that engaging in combat with Corinthians was akin to participating in a game of chess against an adversary who perpetually reinterpreted the established regulations, not through overt deception, but by unearthing perspectives on the rules that had remained entirely unconsidered by others. Yet perhaps the most profoundly intriguing aspect of Corinth in the aftermath of Sisyphus's reign lies in the distinct manner by which its populace engages with authority. Having been governed by a monarch who consistently outmaneuvered even divine powers, the Corinthians have cultivated a profound and judicious skepticism toward any individual or institution asserting infallible knowledge or ultimate dominion. When, for instance, a peripatetic philosopher arrives in their illustrious city, proclaiming to possess ultimate insights into the fundamental nature of existence, the Corinthians extend a courteous audience. They then proceed to pose a series of meticulously formulated inquiries, which, with gentle persistence, progressively illuminate the inherent lacunae in his purported sagacity. This intellectual rigor is not born of a cruel impulse. Rather, it stems from a genuine, insatiable curiosity regarding novel concepts, coupled with a learned reluctance to accept any assertion without rigorous, scrupulous examination. This profound autonomy of thought has, in turn, transformed Corinth into a vibrant intellectual hub, drawing thinkers and innovators from across the entire Mediterranean basin. Scholars are acutely aware that if their hypotheses can withstand the discerning scrutiny of a Corinthian audience, they possess the intellectual fortitude to be presented successfully anywhere, precisely because Corinthian audiences are renowned for posing the most penetrating and insightful questions. The very architecture of the city's sacred edifices, too, unmistakably mirrors the enduring influence of Sisyphus. Whereas other Greek polis might construct temples primarily to awe the celestial beings with sheer monumental scale and opulent grandeur, Corinthian temples are instead conceived with an ingenious cleverness. The venerable temple of Apollo, for example, is oriented with such meticulous precision that the nascent rays of the morning sun strike directly upon the statue of the god, imbuing it with an ethereal luminosity that makes it appear to glow with divine light. Similarly, the Temple of Aphrodite employs acoustical principles so skillfully that even a softly whispered supplication at one extremity of the sacred space can be distinctly apprehended at the altar, fostering in worshippers a profound sense of divine intimacy, as if the goddess herself were personally attending to their heartfelt petitions. These ingenious designs are not conceived as attempts to deceive the gods. The Greeks were far too devout for such sacrilege. Instead, they represent sophisticated expressions of human creativity and profound reverence, innovative methods of rendering the religious experience more deeply meaningful and indelibly memorable for the faithful. As the twilight descends upon Corinth, one might readily discover oneself immersed in the lively ambiance of one of the city's numerous taverns, absorbing the diverse conversations that eddy and flow around them. The subjects under discussion are, in essence, those common to any Greek city-state: the intricacies of political maneuvering, the ebbs and flows of mercantile trade, the complexities of familial bonds, and the ever-present currents of local gossip. Yet, there is a distinct intellectual rigor to the manner in which Corinthians engage with these topics. When an individual articulates a predicament, the initial inclination of their companions diverges from simple commiseration or direct counsel. Instead, it manifests as a cascade of probing questions. Have you considered approaching this challenge from an entirely different vantage point? What if the underlying problem isn't actually what you perceive it to be? What consequences might ensue if you were to undertake the precise opposite of what everyone typically anticipates? This is far from cold, detached intellectualism. Corinthians harbor deep affection and concern for their compatriots and neighbors, but they have assimilated from their former king the profound lesson that the most effective way to assist someone often involves catalyzing a paradigm shift in their cognitive approach to their situation. A young merchant, for instance, grappling with intense competition from a rival trader, might depart a Corinthian tavern not with ready-made solutions, but with an entirely novel comprehension of his commercial enterprise, simply because the precisely targeted questions helped him discern opportunities he had previously overlooked. As one meanders homeward through the hushed streets, past domiciles where families are settling into the quiet rhythms of the night, one might pause to reflect upon the profound implications of residing within a polis so fundamentally shaped by a figure like Sisyphus. It is not that every inhabitant of Corinth is a born deceiver or a crafty conniver. Indeed, the vast majority are honest, industrious, and straightforward in their daily dealings. Nevertheless, all have been subtly touched by the pervasive notion that intelligence and creativity are virtues deserving of diligent nurture. They have learned that complex problems frequently admit of multiple, often unconventional, solutions. That authority, while deserving of respect, should also be questioned respectfully but persistently, and that the inherent human capacity for divergent thought represents one of humanity's most invaluable endowments. In an unexpected twist of fate, Sisyphus ultimately achieved a form of immortality, not through the audacious act of cheating death, but through the enduring imprint he left upon the very people he once ruled. Every instance where a Corinthian merchant devises an inventive solution to a business conundrum, every time a Corinthian engineer conceptualizes an innovative structural design, every occasion a Corinthian citizen poses a penetrating question that pierces to the very core of an issue. In these moments, something of Sisyphus lives on. Perhaps this constitutes a far more profound and meaningful eternal life than he could ever have envisioned. Not an endless personal existence, but the perpetuation of intellectual paradigms and ethical principles that render the world a more dynamic and interesting place. One might contemplate the nature of the lasting legacy an individual might aspire to leave upon their own community, and what it would signify to recognize that one's unique approach to problem-solving had become an integral part of how an entire urban populace navigated the complexities of daily existence. The narrative of Sisyphus transcends the mere chronicle of a single clever king and his perpetually rolling boulder. It delves into something far more expansive, the precarious equilibrium of dominion between mortals and gods, and the profound repercussions when an individual defiantly rejects their predetermined station within that cosmic arrangement. One might envision the august assembly hall of Mount Olympus, several days subsequent to Sisyphus being consigned to his eternal, arduous task. The Olympian deities are engaged in one of their customary convocations, deliberating upon the temporal concerns of humanity and the overarching management of the cosmos. Yet, on this particular occasion, the discourse continually circles back to the extraordinary case of the Corinthian monarch. Zeus, the supreme sovereign of the gods, occupies his majestic throne with a contemplative mien. Around him, his esteemed fellow deities earnestly debate the far-reaching ramifications of the events they have recently witnessed. For Sisyphus, it is clear, has instigated inquiries that extend far beyond simple transgression and retribution. The fundamental issue, declares Athena, the sagacious goddess of wisdom, is not merely that he enchained Thanatos or cunningly outwitted Hades. The truly problematic aspect is that he succeeded. For months, he genuinely managed to subvert the foundational architecture of existence. Apollo, the radiant god of music and prophecy, articulates his agreement with a solemn nod. Mortals in distant cities are already recounting tales of Sisyphus. Some of these narratives, alarmingly, convey a tone of almost open admiration. This indeed represents the crux of the dilemma confronting the gods. It is no longer solely about meting out punishment to a single individual for his transgressions. It is about preserving the overarching cosmic framework that ensures the universe functions according to divine decree. If mortals begin to harbor the belief that they can successfully challenge celestial authority, what becomes of the delicate cosmic order? Hades, still visibly discomfited by having been outmaneuvered by a mere mortal, interjects. The penalty I have devised should serve as a formidable cautionary example. Every human who apprehends this tale will grasp that cleverness alone is insufficient to vanquish the gods. But will they truly? Queries Hermes, the swift messenger. Sisyphus did not fail because he lacked sufficient cunning. He failed because we ultimately opted to employ overwhelming, irresistible force to subdue him. That, my lords, is an altogether different proposition. And indeed, this distinction proves to be absolutely pivotal. The Olympian deities did not emerge victorious over Sisyphus in a contest of intellect or cunning. They did not outsmart him or ensnare him within his own intricate stratagems. Instead, they simply leveraged their inherent divine power to override his mortal ingenuity. This particular outcome conveyed a message profoundly divergent from their original design and intent. To fully comprehend the gravity of this matter, one must consider the operational dynamics of ancient Greek society. The intricate relationship between mortals and gods did not resemble the stark power imbalance between slaves and their masters. Rather, it bore a closer resemblance to the complex, occasionally contentious, bond between citizens and their government, a system governed by certain understood, albeit unwritten, rules. Mortals were beholden to venerate the gods, perform appropriate rituals, and accept their fated destinies. In return, the gods were presumed to exercise equitable judgment, to reward virtue, and to diligently maintain cosmic order. When either party transgressed these mutual expectations, significant problems invariably arose. Sisyphus had violated his portion of this sacred covenant in spectacular fashion. Yet, his audacious transgressions inadvertently exposed uncomfortable truths regarding the gods' side of the equation. He had achieved success in his intricate schemes, not through any preternatural capabilities, but through meticulous scrutiny of how the divine system actually operated and the astute leverage of its inherent vulnerabilities. When he enchained Thanatos, he did so by appealing directly to the god of death's professional pride and innate curiosity. When he manipulated Hades into permitting his return to the mortal realm, he expertly exploited the procedural rigidity of the chthonic realm and the god's profound respect for proper funeral rites. These were not magical solutions. They represented social engineering on a truly cosmic scale. Back in the mortal world, philosophers and influential politicians were beginning to earnestly discuss the far-reaching ramifications of Sisyphus's exploits. In the bustling intellectual hub of Athens, a nascent philosopher named Democritus was formulating groundbreaking ideas concerning the nature of reality, concepts that bore a discernible intellectual lineage to Sisyphus's precedents. If a mere mortal could comprehend divine systems well enough to manipulate them, what profound implications did that hold for the fundamental nature of those very systems? Concurrently, in the militaristic city-state of Sparta, shrewd military strategists were meticulously studying Sisyphus's methods. How, they pondered, did he manage to identify points of susceptibility within what appeared to be perfectly immutable systems? How did he maintain his composure and strategic acumen when confronted with the overwhelming force of divine wrath? These were invaluable skills that might well find potent applications in purely mortal conflicts. The story of Sisyphus continued its journey throughout the Greek world, yet it was continually metamorphosing as it traversed the Hellenic landscape. Some versions deliberately underscored Sisyphus's overweening pride and his eventual, inevitable punishment, serving as a stark warning about the inherent perils of challenging the celestial powers. Other iterations, however, focused intently on his remarkable cleverness and indomitable persistence, elevating him to the status of almost a heroic figure, a paragon of resourceful ingenuity. In the version commonly recounted within democratic Athens, Sisyphus evolved into a potent symbol of intellectual freedom, a man who steadfastly refused to accept that any form of authority, even divine authority, was beyond the purview of critical examination. Athenian storytellers emphasized his careful reasoning, his systematic approach to intractable problems, and his courageous willingness to confront the ultimate consequences of his actions. In the more conservative city of Sparta, the narrative was framed quite differently. Here, Sisyphus represented the inherent dangers of excessive individualism. Spartan versions of the tale highlighted how his selfish desire to circumvent death disrupted the natural order of existence and, in doing so, caused suffering for others. The overarching moral in these accounts revolved around the paramount importance of accepting one's assigned role within the greater community. But perhaps the most compelling iterations of this ancient narrative are those recounted in the smaller, more provincial Greek polities, such as the storied city of Corinth itself, where the populace lived under the immediate and often unyielding dominion of monarchs and despots. Within these localized accounts, the figure of Sisyphus undergoes a profound metamorphosis, evolving into something far more nuanced and intricate, a stark, admonitory fable delineating the inherent limitations of even the most ingenious stratagems devised to resist entrenched power. These regional chroniclers do not cast Sisyphus in the simplistic mold of either a quintessential hero or an unambiguous villain. Instead, they portray him as a man of formidable intellect who grasped a fundamental truth concerning the intrinsic nature of authority, that all systems, irrespective of their apparent vastness or seeming perfection, harbor latent vulnerabilities that can be astutely exploited by an individual possessing sufficient observational acuity. Yet, these narratives simultaneously underscore the ultimate constraint of such an approach. While intellectual cunning can indeed pinpoint and exploit systemic weaknesses, it fundamentally lacks the capacity to alter the underlying distribution of power. Sisyphus, for instance, could artfully manipulate the labyrinthine divine bureaucracy, but he could never elevate himself to the status of a god. He might successfully defer his ultimate destiny, but he could not entirely elude its inexorable grasp. This particular interpretation of the tale resonates deeply with those who find themselves living under political regimes they are powerless to directly confront. They keenly apprehend the allure of discovering ingenious methods to circumvent oppressive authority, but they also grasp the critical importance of discerning precisely when such efforts reach their insurmountable limits. Concurrently, high above on the hallowed peaks of Mount Olympus, the divine pantheon was arriving at remarkably similar conclusions. The audacious case of Sisyphus had compelled them to engage in a more meticulous reevaluation of how they exercised their celestial authority. They collectively realized that presenting an image of folly or incompetence carried almost as much peril as appearing genuinely weak. We must proceed with greater circumspection, Zeus, the sovereign of the gods, ultimately decreed. Not because mortals genuinely pose an existential threat to our supremacy, but because the very foundation of our authority rests, in part, upon their enduring respect. Should they lose reverence for our competence, they might begin to probe boundaries we decidedly wish to remain unchallenged. This pivotal realization instigated what one might accurately term a series of reforms within the divine governmental structure. The gods began to dedicate heightened attention to the systematic vulnerabilities that Sisyphus had so cunningly exploited. Procedural protocols were rigorously tightened, spheres of responsibility were meticulously clarified, and robust checks and balances were instituted to preclude any future bureaucratic manipulation. But they also enacted a more subtle, yet equally significant, alteration. They commenced emphasizing different virtues in their ongoing interactions with the mortal realm. Rather than merely demanding unquestioning obedience and reverential awe, they started to actively commend intelligence and innovative thought, provided these estimable qualities were directed towards constructive rather than subversive objectives. Figures like the celebrated hero Odysseus, for example, gained increasing favor with the gods during this transformative era. Much like Sisyphus, Odysseus was renowned for his exceptional ingenuity and his remarkable ability to devise creative solutions to seemingly intractable problems. However, unlike Sisyphus, Odysseus judiciously employed these formidable abilities in service of goals that unequivocally garnered divine approbation. His arduous journey home to his devoted family, the valiant defense of his cherished kingdom, and the meticulous preservation of social order. This profound shift represented a unique form of compromise. The gods acknowledged that intelligence and creativity were admirable human attributes that ought not to be suppressed. Yet, they simultaneously made it unequivocally clear that these qualities were to be wielded responsibly, strictly within the established bounds of the overarching cosmic order. As the ceaseless march of years continued, the captivating narrative of Sisyphus ascended to the status of a perennial reference point for profound discussions concerning power dynamics, the multifaceted nature of resistance, and the inherent limits of both. When an autocratic ruler grew excessively oppressive, the populace might lament that he was forcing his subjects to become like Sisyphus, implying that he was driving them towards desperate and ultimately self-destructive acts of defiance. Conversely, when a burgeoning rebel or an overzealous revolutionary began to wildly overestimate their prospects for success, their sagacious companions might forewarn them not to roll the boulder, a poignant phrase that evolved to signify the pursuit of a futile struggle destined to culminate in personal ruin. Yet, the story also furnished a rich lexicon for articulating legitimate forms of resistance against established authority. When an individual deftly exposed inherent flaws within a system or ingeniously discovered creative pathways to circumvent unjust regulations, they might be lauded for their Sophian insight, the remarkable capacity to perceive beyond the superficial permanence of power structures, directly to the latent vulnerabilities concealed beneath. In this profound manner, Sisyphus transcended his role as a mere character in a cautionary tale. He emerged as an enduring symbol of the eternal tension existing between established authority and intellectual acumen, between brute power and profound wisdom, between the resigned acceptance of the world as it is and the audacious imagining of how it might be fundamentally different. And perhaps this is precisely why his story continues to resonate with such potent force thousands of years later. We all navigate life within complex systems of power that, at times, appear overwhelmingly permanent and immutable. We all encounter pivotal moments when we must weigh the decision of whether to accept inherent limitations or to bravely challenge them. We all ponder whether sheer cleverness and unwavering persistence can ultimately surmount seemingly impossible odds. The enduring narrative of Sisyphus suggests that the answer is paradoxically both yes and no. Yes, intelligence and creativity possess the capacity to achieve truly remarkable feats, to expose insidious weaknesses in even the most formidable systems, and to secure victories that initially appear utterly unattainable. But no, these hard-won victories may not prove to be permanent, and the ultimate cost of achieving them may, in the final reckoning, far outweigh their transient benefits. What then is your perspective on this delicate equilibrium? When is it truly justifiable to challenge authority, even when the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against you? And when, conversely, is it wiser to humbly accept existing limitations and strive to operate effectively within the established systems? Perhaps the true wisdom lies not in dogmatically choosing one approach over the other, but rather in cultivating the discerning judgment to understand precisely when each strategy is most appropriate and effective. While Sisyphus toils eternally with his colossal boulder, let us momentarily divert our attention to explore the vast, intricate realm where his perpetual punishment unfolds. For the underworld, one must understand, is far more than merely a desolate destination for the departed. It is, in fact, an entire subterranean civilization, complete with its own unique culture, complex political structures, and meticulously organized daily routines. Picture yourself traversing the administrative districts of Hades. What you might encounter is not the fiery torment so often depicted, but rather an environment strikingly reminiscent of the governmental quarter of a sprawling, meticulously organized city. There are imposing edifices constructed from smooth, polished black stone, corridors stretching into the unseen distance, lined with filing cabinets that ascend far beyond the reach of mortal sight, and the constant, rhythmic sound of scribes diligently scratching away with their styluses upon an endless multitude of scrolls. The underworld, you see, is burdened with the monumental task of processing every single soul that departs the mortal coil, anywhere across the entire globe. This represents an utterly staggering volume of meticulous paperwork. Each individual soul necessitates careful evaluation, impartial judgment, and precise assignment to its appropriate section of the afterlife. It is an intricate operation demanding rigorous organization and an unwavering attention to even the minutest detail. At the very epicenter of this colossal administrative system reside the three venerable judges of the dead, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These were, in their mortal lives, powerful kings, selected for their unparalleled wisdom and unblemished fairness to serve as eternal arbiters of the afterlife. They dedicate their days and their nights, though the concept of linear time functions quite differently in the underworld, to meticulously reviewing countless cases and rendering definitive decisions regarding where each soul shall spend eternity. If one were granted the extraordinary privilege of observing one of their daily case review meetings, they would undoubtedly be astonished by the methodical precision and profound thoughtfulness that characterizes the entire process. Each judge specializes in distinct categories of cases. Minos, the most sagacious, typically handles the intricate ethical situations, dealing with souls whose earthly existences involved profoundly difficult moral choices. Rhadamanthus, the embodiment of justice, meticulously deals with cases involving legal matters and adherence to divine law, while Aeacus, the most pragmatic of the trio, manages the more straightforward and less ambiguous assessments. Today, they are meticulously reviewing the comprehensive file of a merchant hailing from Rhodes, who passed away just last week. The man, by most accounts, was generally honest in his commercial dealings, displayed unwavering devotion to his family, and contributed generously to his local temple. However, he also accumulated a substantial portion of his fortune by selling weapons to both opposing factions during a protracted local conflict, an action that undeniably prolonged a war that inflicted considerable suffering upon the populace. The underlying intention is what truly matters, argued Rhadamanthus, his voice measured. He wasn't actively attempting to prolong the conflict. He was simply conducting his legitimate business. But the ultimate effect was precisely the same, countered Minos, his brow furrowed with contemplation. He undeniably profited from widespread suffering, irrespective of his subjective intentions. Aeacus, ever the most practical and discerning of the three, pointed to a specific section within the merchant's voluminous file. You consider what he chose to do with those profits. He financed the construction of 3 schools and generously funded comprehensive medical care for war orphans. He utilized wealth gained from conflict to actively help heal its devastating consequences. After a thoughtful hour of intense discussion and deliberation, they finally reached a unanimous decision. The merchant would be consigned to spend a designated period in the middle regions of the underworld, neither subjected to punitive torment, nor immediately admitted to the serene, peaceful meadows of Elysium. He would be afforded ample opportunities to atone for the moral debt created by his war profiteering through dedicated service to other souls. This kind of nuanced, finely balanced judgment is highly typical of how the underworld actually operates, largely dispelling popular stories of relentless, eternal torment. In truth, the vast majority of souls receive punishments that are far more akin to structured rehabilitation programs. The overarching goal is not vindictive revenge or gratuitous cruelty, but rather the meticulous restoration of cosmic balance and universal order. Of course, there are indeed exceptions to this rule. Some souls do receive truly eternal punishments, but these are rigorously reserved for the most extreme and egregious cases, individuals who committed crimes so fundamentally egregious that they irrevocably disrupted the basic order of existence itself. People like, well, Sisyphus. The other infamous eternal prisoners include Tantalus, who committed the unspeakable act of killing his own son and serving him as a grotesque dinner to the gods, and Ixion, who audaciously attempted to seduce Zeus's divine wife. These were not ordinary transgressions. They were profound violations of the most foundational principles that hold reality and cosmic order together. But for every soul enduring eternal punishment, there are literally thousands more diligently working through more temporary consequences, for their more commonplace human failings. The underworld boasts vast, purpose-built workshops where souls learn skills they never mastered during their mortal lives. There are specialized counseling centers where individuals diligently work through the psychological damage they inadvertently or intentionally cause to others. There are tranquil meditation gardens where souls learn to cultivate virtues such as patience and profound humility. If one were to walk through these bustling areas, they would find them surprisingly normal and orderly. Former formidable warriors, for instance, are seen learning the delicate art of weaving, thereby cultivating both patience and refined fine motor control. Erstwhile tyrants are observed working collaboratively in teams, learning the invaluable essence of cooperation and shared endeavor. Former misers are discovering the profound joy of giving freely by assisting newly arrived souls in adjusting to their unfamiliar chthonic circumstances. The supervisors overseeing these extensive programs are not demonic entities or monstrous wardens. They are, in fact, souls who have successfully completed their own arduous rehabilitation and have subsequently chosen to remain in the underworld to selflessly help guide others. Many of them discover that this post-mortal work is far more meaningful and fulfilling than anything they ever accomplished during their mortal lives. One of the venerable overseers in this fascinating realm is a former buccaneer captain, a man known as Thronon, who dedicated 3 decades to the rigorous educational workshops, diligently mastering the intricate disciplines of mathematics, engineering, and architecture. Today, he presides over a specialized curriculum designed to instruct newly departed souls in the art of construction, not merely the erection of physical edifices, but the profound creation of interconnected communities, meaningful relationships, and enduring trust. Mortals, in their earthly existence, often perceive death as the ultimate cessation. Thronon elucidates to a gathering of recently arrived spirits, his voice resonating with ancient wisdom. However, it is more accurately akin to a graduation ceremony. You have successfully completed the foundational curriculum of being. Now commences the advanced coursework, the truly profound endeavor. His current cohort comprises a diverse assemblage of souls, originating from various epochs of the ancient world. Among them is a formidable Celtic chieftain, who must internalize the crucial lesson that sheer physical prowess is not invariably the optimal solution to all dilemmas. There is also an astute Egyptian scribe, whose intellectual brilliance with numerical concepts was unfortunately paralleled by a marked ineptitude in interpersonal interactions. Additionally, a Persian merchant, renowned for his magnanimity towards his immediate kin, yet notoriously cutthroat in his dealings with commercial rivals, is also present. These disparate individuals collaborate on intricate projects that necessitate each participant to leverage their inherent strengths while simultaneously confronting and ameliorating their personal frailties. The Celtic chieftain, for instance, is progressively learning to attentively heed and consider the perspectives and innovative proposals of others. The Egyptian scribe is developing the crucial ability to articulate complex theoretical frameworks in a manner that is readily comprehensible to all members of the group. Concurrently, the Persian merchant is cultivating a genuine sense of concern for the overall welfare of individuals whom he does not possess a direct personal acquaintance with. This undertaking is undeniably a protracted process, characterized by its measured pace, yet it is far from disagreeable. There exists a profound sense of gratification derived from the acquisition of novel competencies, from attaining a more profound understanding of one's intrinsic self, and from the gradual metamorphosis into the individual one always harbored the latent capacity to become, but regrettably never quite achieved during their ephemeral mortal sojourn. Naturally, not every inhabitant of the underworld is engaged in such programs of spiritual rehabilitation. Those souls who led exemplary and virtuous lives proceed directly to the Elysian fields, idyllic and tranquil meadows where they are at liberty to spend eternity in whatever manner they deem fit. A considerable number of these fortunate souls elect to perpetuate their journey of learning and personal evolution, albeit without the structured and compulsory programs mandated for those spirits who still possess further developmental work to undertake. Furthermore, there are those select souls who consciously opt for the phenomenon of reincarnation. Subsequent to dedicating a period of time within the underworld, assimilating the essential lessons they needed to acquire, some spirits make the deliberate decision to re-experience mortal existence. They partake of the waters of the river Lethe, a mystical stream that effaces all prior memories, and are subsequently reborn into novel lives, replete with fresh opportunities and unwritten narratives. This intricate system engenders an intriguing dynamic within the underworld itself. Certain sectors exude an aura of permanence and settled tranquility, being populated by souls who have discovered their eternal abode. Conversely, other regions possess a more transient, school-like ambience, characterized by a perpetually shifting population of souls diligently striving towards their subsequent destination. The long-term residents frequently become integral participants in the elaborate administration of this realm. They fulfill crucial roles as sagacious counselors, dedicated educators, insightful guides, and meticulous clerks within the sprawling bureaucracy that meticulously orchestrates the smooth functioning of everything. Many of these enduring inhabitants discover profound fulfillment in this work. They perceive themselves as contributing significantly to an entity far grander than their individual selves, actively assisting in the preservation of the cosmic order that meticulously governs all facets of existence. However, even within the confines of this impeccably organized system, persistent challenges and ongoing debates invariably emerge. The esteemed judges regularly scrutinize established policies and procedural guidelines, endeavoring to guarantee that justice is dispensed with unwavering equity and that the rehabilitative programs are indeed yielding their intended efficacy. Recently, their deliberations have centered upon the infamous case of Sisyphus and the profound insights his unique punishment might offer concerning the inherent nature of their system. His notorious aptitude for manipulating divine bureaucratic processes has precipitated a comprehensive review of the established protocols for managing truly exceptional cases. The fundamental predicament, Minos gravely observes during one of their solemn convocations, is that our meticulously crafted system was primarily conceptualized for ordinary souls who committed conventional transgressions. We simply did not foresee an individual who would audaciously perceive divine authority as merely another conundrum to be ingeniously resolved. Yet that is precisely why his prescribed punishment is so exquisitely fitting, Rhadamanthus retorts with conviction. He dedicated his entire mortal life to the relentless pursuit of solving the inherently unsolvable. Now he is granted the eternal opportunity to persist in that very same Sisyphean endeavor. Iacchus, ever the pragmatist, highlights a distinct and equally pressing concern. What transpires if his punishment, against all expectations, actually proves efficacious? What if he ultimately acquires humility and genuine acceptance? Do we then grant him release? This constitutes a truly captivating philosophical quandary. The underworld's comprehensive rehabilitation programs are, by their very design, intended to ultimately achieve success. Yet Sisyphus was unequivocally condemned to an eternal punishment. What becomes of this inherent tension when eternal damnation directly conflicts with the overarching objective of facilitating the learning and profound personal growth of souls? This particular species of philosophical enigma is precisely the sort of intellectual stimulation that sustains the enduring interest of the underworld's permanent denizens. They are not merely maintaining a cosmic penitentiary, they are actively participating in a perpetual experiment in the nuanced realms of justice, personal evolution, and the profound possibility of ultimate redemption. As one perambulates through the tranquil districts of the underworld, during the hours that approximate evening, or whatever semblance of twilight exists in a realm perpetually devoid of a solar orb, one might serendipitously encounter souls from disparate historical epochs engaged in profound discussions concerning these weighty philosophical questions. A distinguished Roman philosopher might be observed engaging in an intricate ethical debate with a venerable Chinese sage. A Babylonian astronomer could be seen sharing his celestial observations with an astute Egyptian mathematician. A formidable Norse warrior might be found earnestly learning about the intricate nuances of honor from a seasoned Polynesian navigator. The underworld, it ultimately transpires, is not merely a terminal destination for the deceased. It is, in fact, a vibrant intellectual crucible where the most profound inquiries regarding existence, justice, and the fundamental essence of human nature are meticulously explored by minds liberated from the immediate and pressing exigencies of mortal life. It functions as a veritable cosmic university, its expansive curriculum encompassing everything from the foundational principles of basic ethics to the intricate fundamental nature of reality itself. And somewhere within this immense, intricately structured realm, Sisyphus indefatigably continues his arduous task of propelling his colossal boulder up the incline of the mountain, perhaps incrementally internalizing lessons that will one day transform him into a markedly different individual than the cunning monarch who foolishly presumed he could outmaneuver death itself. What are your considered reflections on this particular conceptualization of the afterlife as a dynamic arena for continuous learning and profound personal development, rather than a simplistic system of mere recompense or retribution? Furthermore, if you were afforded the boundless expanse of eternity to learn and evolve, which specific facets of your own being would you prioritize working upon first? While our narrative has hitherto concentrated on Sisyphus and his tempestuous relationship with the inevitability of mortality, numerous other mortals throughout the Hellenic world have been experiencing their own distinct encounters with the inexorable force of death. Some of these encounters proved more felicitous than others, and the poignant narrative of Alcestis and Admetus presents us with a markedly different strategy for circumventing death, one predicated upon the profound power of love rather than mere intellectual cleverness. Envision yourself situated within the kingdom of Pherae in Thessaly, a realm presided over by King Admetus, a sovereign celebrated across all of Greece for his inherent benevolence, unwavering sense of justice, and profound devotion to the pantheon of gods. In stark contrast to Sisyphus, who appeared to regard the divine powers as nothing more than intricate problems necessitating ingenious solutions, Admetus harbored a genuine reverence for the gods and conscientiously endeavored to conduct his life in accordance with their sacred decrees. This deeply ingrained respect yielded an unforeseen dividend when Apollo, the revered god of melodic music, prophetic foresight, and the radiant sun, was temporarily banished from the celestial heights of Mount Olympus as a punitive measure for his act of slaying the Cyclopes, who were responsible for forging the mighty thunderbolts of Zeus. Apollo was consequently sentenced to serve a mortal monarch for a period of 1 year. He possessed the prerogative to select any king throughout Greece, yet his choice fell unequivocally upon Admetus. For a full 12-month cycle, the magnificent god of music diligently performed the duties of a humble shepherd, tending to Admetus's numerous flocks amidst the verdant hills bordering Pheræ. One might reasonably surmise that this arrangement would prove inherently challenging, a proud and puissant deity reduced to the toil of mortal labor, juxtaposed with a mortal king endeavoring to ascertain the appropriate manner in which to treat a divine servant. However, the unconventional partnership unfolded with remarkable and surprising harmony. Admetus extended to Apollo the identical measure of kindness and considerate treatment that he routinely afforded to all his subjects. He never once pressed to ascertain which particular shepherd was, in fact, a god in cunning disguise. He simply ensured that all his shepherds, irrespective of their divine or mortal status, were consistently well-nourished, fairly compensated for their labors, and treated with an unwavering sense of respect. Apollo, for his part, immersed himself in the pastoral work with an almost divine zeal and enthusiasm. Under his meticulous care, Admetus's flocks flourished with an unprecedented vitality. The sheep yielded wool of such exquisite fineness that it was unmatched anywhere in Thessaly. The goats produced milk so exceptionally rich that it seemed to embody the very essence of liquid sunshine. Even the humble shepherds' huts were imbued with an unexpected, almost ethereal beauty, for Apollo, being the embodiment of harmony and grace, could not help but infuse these qualities into every single thing he touched. When the prescribed year of service drew to its inevitable conclusion, Apollo genuinely experienced a profound sense of sorrow at the prospect of his departure. He had cultivated a genuine fondness for the unpretentious rhythms of the pastoral existence, and he deeply appreciated Admetus's consistent kindness and magnanimity. As a magnanimous parting gift, he bestowed upon the king an extraordinary boon. When Admetus's predetermined moment to succumb to death eventually arrived, he would possess the singular ability to escape its clutches, provided he could locate an individual genuinely willing to voluntarily perish in his stead. At the time of its pronouncement, this appeared to be a remarkably generous, yet largely abstract and theoretical, gift. Admetus was then in the prime of his youth, robust in health, and meticulously cautious in his conduct. The specter of death seemed exceedingly distant. He expressed his profound gratitude to Apollo with a gracious demeanor, and subsequently gave little further thought to the matter. Many tranquil years elapsed. Admetus entered into matrimony with Alcestis, the esteemed daughter of King Peleus, in a matrimonial ceremony that necessitated his successful completion of an ostensibly impossible task: the feat of yoking a formidable lion and a ferocious boar to a single chariot. Apollo, still harboring a deep sense of gratitude for Admetus's unwavering kindness, secretly lent his divine assistance to enable the king to accomplish this extraordinary feat. The marriage proved exceptionally blissful, abundantly blessed with numerous children and an abundance of prosperity. However, as is the immutable decree for all mortals, Admetus's fated time eventually arrived, not through the ravages of war or an unforeseen accident, but through a sudden debilitating illness that grievously afflicted him in what should have been the zenith of his life. As he lay languishing on his deathbed, with the most skilled physicians in all of Greece utterly powerless to alleviate his suffering, he vividly recalled Apollo's extraordinary gift, the possibility of finding someone willing to die in his place. The condition had seemed deceptively straightforward when Apollo initially articulated it. But now, in the face of imminent demise, Admetus acutely perceived the profound complexities inherent in such a request. How does one even commence the arduous process of asking another human being to willingly sacrifice their life for your own? How does one even broach such a profoundly delicate and morbid topic in a normal conversation? His initial inclination was to approach his venerable parents. They were advanced in years, had experienced full and complete lives, and might conceivably be willing to make this ultimate sacrifice for their beloved son. With immense reluctance and a palpable sense of embarrassment, he cautiously approached his father. "Father," he began, his voice strained as he struggled to articulate the precise words, "I have a profound favor to implore of you, a favor of monumental proportions." When he painstakingly elucidated the dire situation, his father listened with a thoughtful and somber expression. Then, with a gentle yet unyielding firmness, he courteously declined. "My son, I harbor an immense and abiding love for you, but I am not yet prepared to depart from this world. I still possess aspirations I wish to fulfill, places I yearn to behold. I have indeed lived a long and fulfilling life, but I am not yet finished experiencing it." His mother tendered a remarkably similar response. She was deeply empathetic to his desperate predicament, but she too felt with an unwavering conviction that her own life was not yet complete. There were beloved grandchildren she earnestly desired to witness grow into adulthood, cherished gardens she still wished to meticulously tend, and countless stories she yearned to bring to their narrative conclusion. Admetus found himself in a peculiar predicament, experiencing a profound sense of disillusionment with his own parents for their unwavering desire to cling to life. A notion of inherent selfishness seemed to permeate his thoughts, suggesting that individuals who had already savored extensive lifespans ought to readily offer themselves as a sacrifice for the sake of a younger generation. Yet, simultaneously, he recognized the inherent difficulty in genuinely censuring them, for who, in their right mind, would willingly embrace an untimely demise, even for a cherished loved one? With this conundrum weighing heavily upon him, Admetus approached his most intimate companions, his most devoted retainers, and even distant kin. The ensuing dialogues proved excruciatingly awkward, defying any coherent description. How, indeed, does one articulate such an extraordinary plea? "Would you kindly consent to perish so that I might continue to exist?" The very phrasing, regardless of its permutation, sounded unequivocally dreadful. Some individuals proffered flimsy excuses, Others unequivocally rejected the proposition. A select few appeared to genuinely deliberate the matter before ultimately concluding that they could not, under any circumstances, proceed with such a monumental act. In the aftermath of these requests, every single one of them regarded Admetus with a subtly altered gaze, as if the mere act of his inquiry had irrevocably transformed the very fabric of their relationship. As the days inexorably advanced, and his physical condition progressively deteriorated, Admetus began to succumb to an overwhelming sense of despair. Apollo's divine boon, which had initially appeared as an act of immense generosity, was now proving utterly ineffectual. It became painfully apparent that no one harbored sufficient affection for him to willingly surrender their life. A devastating realization that inflicted an agony almost surpassing the dread prospect of death itself. It was precisely at this critical juncture that Alcestis, his devoted wife, arrived at a momentous decision, one that would immortalize her name throughout the annals of Greek history for countless centuries to come. She approached him with quiet grace one evening as he lay enfeebled and feverish in their shared bedchamber. The room was bathed in a gentle twilight, illuminated solely by the flickering glow of oil lamps that cast an ethereal ballet of shadows upon the walls. Beyond the confines of their dwelling, the ambient sounds of the city gradually subsided into the tranquil rhythms of the encroaching night. "I have been contemplating your predicament," she remarked, settling beside him and tenderly clasping his hand. "Do not," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please do not. I cannot possibly ask this of you." "You are not asking," she responded softly, her voice imbued with a quiet resolve. "I am offering." The ensuing conversation diverged profoundly from anything chronicled in the sagas of Sisyphus's ingenious machinations. There was no trace of duplicity, no manipulative ploys, no attempt to unearth legalistic loopholes or to exploit technicalities. It was, quite simply, a woman deeply devoted to her husband, articulating the profound reasons behind her willingness to embrace mortality so that he might continue his earthly existence. "Our beloved children require a father," she declared with unwavering conviction. "The kingdom stands in need of its sovereign, and as for myself, I would unequivocally prefer a truncated life, imbued with the profound certainty of your continued presence in this world, rather than a prolonged existence shadowed by the agonizing knowledge of your absence." Admetus, in a desperate attempt, endeavored to dissuade her, to explore alternative solutions, to implore her to reconsider her resolute stance. But Alcestis's mind was irrevocably made up, demonstrating the same quiet determination that characterized all her significant decisions. Her actions were not born of desperation or impulsive fervor. Rather, she was making a meticulously considered choice, firmly rooted in her profound understanding of both love and duty. The actual transfer of life transpired with astonishing gentleness. Thanatos, the formidable god of death, manifested within their chamber, precisely as he had once appeared within Sisyphus's royal palace. However, on this occasion, there were no restraining chains, no cunning deceptions, no desperate attempts at negotiation. Alcestis simply rose, bestowed a final tender kiss upon her husband, and departed with death as naturally and unassumingly as if she were merely paying a visit to a nearby neighbor. Admetus experienced an instantaneous and miraculous recovery. Apollo's divine gift functioned with precise efficacy, exactly as it had been promised. The very instant Alcestis drew her last breath, his debilitating illness completely vanished, and his robust strength was fully restored. Yet this profound victory bore no resemblance whatsoever to a triumphant celebration. He was indeed alive, but at a staggering price that rendered life itself almost insufferable. The populace of Pherae mourned Alcestis with a depth of sorrow they had never before experienced for any individual. Her passing was not the result of an unfortunate accident, a ravaging illness, or the inevitable march of old age. She had succumbed to the boundless power of love, selflessly sacrificing herself for the enduring welfare of her cherished family and her beloved kingdom. Her funeral rites transcended a mere somber occasion, evolving into an eloquent celebration of the loftiest virtues humanity could ever aspire to embody. However, the narrative does not conclude at this juncture, for, unlike Sisyphus's solitary and arduous struggle against the inexorable cosmic forces, Alcestis's unparalleled sacrifice resonated deeply within the hearts of both divine beings and mortal men alike. Her supremely selfless act generated profound ripples that extended far beyond the immediate confines of her own family. The extraordinary news of her deed eventually reached Heracles, the illustrious hero, who was traversing Pherae on his arduous journey to accomplish one of his legendary labors. Upon his arrival at Admetus's royal palace, he discovered his old friend enveloped in profound grief, extending courtesies to his guests with a mechanical detachment. His heart undeniably shattered. Heracles, a demigod who had confronted monstrous beasts, defied powerful deities, and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges, was profoundly moved by the poignant tale of Alcestis's ultimate sacrifice. Here was an individual who had vanquished death, not through sheer physical prowess or cunning intellect, but through the unadulterated strength of pure, unyielding love. It seemed fundamentally unjust that such a magnificent victory should culminate in such a profound tragedy. Consequently, Heracles made a momentous decision, one that would have appeared utterly unfathomable to anyone familiar solely with the story of Sisyphus. He resolved to engage in a direct confrontation with death itself, intending to reclaim that which death had unjustly seized. The epic struggle between Heracles and Thanatos unfolded within the shadowy interstices between life and the spectral realm of death, in an ethereal domain where brute physical strength held less sway than the indomitable power of an unwavering will. Heracles fought not for his personal preservation, nor for the fleeting allure of glory or individual gain, but rather for the fundamental principle that a love as profound and pure as Alcestis's should not remain unrequited or unrewarded. And somehow, against all conceivable odds, he emerged victorious. His triumph was not achieved through deceptive stratagems or legalistic loopholes, but through sheer, unadulterated determination, fueled by an unshakable moral conviction. Thanatos, confronted by an adversary who battled solely for the transcendent power of love rather than any personal advantage, found himself utterly incapable of maintaining his relentless grip upon Alcestis's precious soul. When Heracles, with triumphant grace, restored Alcestis to the realm of the living and into the welcoming embrace of her husband, it represented a distinctly different form of victory over death than that which Sisyphus had painstakingly achieved. Whereas Sisyphus had cunningly endeavored to evade death through cleverness and deceit, Alcestis had willingly embraced death through the boundless power of love, and as it ultimately transpired, love proved to be more potent than either mere cleverness or the inexorable force of death itself. The emotional reunion of Alcestis and Admetus swiftly ascended to legendary status throughout the entirety of Greece, though not in the manner one might initially anticipate. It was not lauded as a mere triumph of heroic strength or a dramatic display of divine intervention. Instead, it was reverently remembered as irrefutable proof that genuine self-sacrifice and profound love inherently generate their own unique and formidable form of power. A power so profound that even death itself is compelled to acknowledge and respect its authority. As the gentle twilight descends upon the royal palace of Pheræ, with Alcestis and Admetus observing their beloved children at play in the sun-drenched courtyard, one might pause to reflect upon the striking divergence of this narrative from the well-known tale of Sisyphus. Both accounts undeniably involve mortal beings daring to challenge the omnipotent force of death, yet they do so through diametrically opposed methodologies. Sisyphus, with his individualistic cleverness, attempted to outwit death, perceiving it as a complex problem amenable to resolution through superior intellect. Alcestis, conversely, embraced death through the profound depths of love, viewing it as a selfless sacrifice capable of serving a far greater good. One approach ultimately culminated in eternal, agonizing punishment. The other, remarkably, led to a miraculous resurrection and enduring happiness. What profound insights, one might ponder, does this stark contrast impart to us regarding the intrinsic nature of death, the transformative power of love, and the often impossible choices we are compelled to make when confronted with seemingly insurmountable situations? And which approach, that of clever self-preservation or that of loving self-sacrifice, do you ultimately believe demonstrates a deeper and more profound wisdom concerning the very essence of what it truly means to be human? Having witnessed the extraordinary manner in which love triumphed over death in the compelling story of Alcestis, let us now delve into an entirely different approach to confronting the impossible. One that relies not upon the cunning intellect of Sisyphus or the ultimate sacrifice of Alcestis, but rather upon the pure, unadulterated power of artistic expression and enchanting music. Envision yourself transported to the verdant hills of Thrace in the northern reaches of Greece, where the most exquisitely beautiful music in the entire world reverberates across the tranquil valleys. This celestial music emanates from Orpheus, the illustrious son of the revered muse Calliope, and widely acclaimed as the most gifted musician who has ever graced the earth. When Orpheus skillfully plays his lyre and sings with his melodious voice, even the most untamed wild animals gather peacefully, captivated by his artistry. Majestic trees spontaneously uproot themselves, drawn irresistibly closer to the enchanting strains of his music. Even the unyielding stones are moved to shed tears at the sheer, ineffable beauty of his melodies. But on this particular evening, the normally vibrant hills of Thrace are shrouded in an unsettling silence. Orpheus sits in mournful solitude beside a freshly dug grave, his cherished lyre lying untouched in his lap, his gaze fixed upon the earth that now covers his beloved wife, Eurydice. The oppressive silence that pervades the landscape is more profound and heart-wrenching than any musical composition he has ever created, for it symbolizes the crushing absence of the one person whose voice he adored more than his own. Eurydice had tragically perished on their very wedding day, not from a debilitating illness or the natural progression of old age, but from the venomous bite of a snake as she frantically fled from the unwanted advances of another man. The tragedy was sudden, utterly senseless, and devastatingly complete. One moment she was brimming with joyous laughter at their wedding feast, radiant with happiness. The very next, she was irrevocably gone, leaving Orpheus utterly alone with his haunting music and his profound, debilitating grief. For countless days, Orpheus has desperately attempted to sing, to unearth some melody that could adequately articulate the overwhelming emotions he is experiencing. However, every single song he attempts inevitably transforms into a lamentation so utterly heartbreaking that even he cannot bear to continue its mournful strains. The very music that once brought unadulterated joy to all who heard it now serves only to amplify his deep-seated sorrow. As he remains seated in the encroaching darkness, Orpheus arrives at a momentous decision, one that will either utterly destroy him or enable him to achieve the seemingly impossible. He resolves to undertake an endeavor that no living person has ever before accomplished. He will embark on a perilous journey to the dreaded underworld and humbly implore Hades to restore his beloved wife to the realm of the living. Unlike Sisyphus, who meticulously plotted and schemed to cunningly evade his own inevitable death, Orpheus harbors no intention of deceiving anyone. And unlike Alcestis, he is not prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice of his own life for the sake of love. His audacious plan is both simpler and perhaps even more daring than either of the aforementioned approaches. He will sing for the formidable gods of the dead, holding on to the fervent hope that the sheer power of music can achieve what brute force and clever stratagems cannot. Oh! The perilous journey to the underworld commences at one of the ominous entrances to the realm of the deceased, a foreboding cave nestled deep within the mountains, where the shadows appear to lead into depths far greater than any earthly cavern should possibly extend. Orpheus bravely steps into this suffocating darkness, carrying solely his cherished lyre, following treacherous paths that living feet were never meant to tread. The initial formidable challenge he encounters is Charon, the ancient ferryman of the treacherous river Styx. Charon adheres to a set of simple, unyielding rules. Only the departed souls are permitted to traverse the murky river, and they must meticulously pay the appropriate fare for passage. Orpheus is conspicuously alive, and he carries no precious coins to offer as payment for his passage. "Turn back," Charon sternly commands him, his voice resonating with the chilling sound of water relentlessly lapping against cold stone. The living have absolutely no legitimate business in the desolate realm of the dead. Rather than engaging in disputes or attempting to negotiate terms with the ancient ferryman, Orpheus simply commenced a melodious performance. His compelling song wove a narrative rich with the essence of love. It was not merely an ode to his profound affection for Eurydice, but a resonant exploration of the boundless spectrum of human affection, the tender devotion of mothers for their progeny, the steadfast loyalty of companions who brave adversity together, and the deep reverence mortals hold for the resplendent world they inhabit, and from which they must inevitably depart. As his voice soared through the melancholic air, a remarkable phenomenon transpired. Charon, who had dutifully conveyed countless souls across the river Styx for innumerable epochs, his ancient visage typically devoid of sentiment, found tears tracing paths down his time-worn cheeks. The song did not employ artifice or persuasive rhetoric to compel him to transgress his immutable regulations. It simply stirred his being so profoundly that he found himself utterly incapable of denying passage to the singer. "Sing again when you return," Charon's voice, a mere whisper, reached Orpheus as he stepped onto the venerable boat. I have forgotten what beauty sounds like. An identical sequence of events unfolded as Orpheus journeyed further into the abyssal depths of the netherworld. Each formidable guardian, every daunting obstacle, and every supernatural challenge was surmounted, not through brute force or deceptive stratagems, but through the compelling and unyielding force of his melodic artistry. Cerberus, the colossal three-headed hound, appointed to vigilantly guard the gates of Hades, reclined, allowing all 6 of its formidable eyes to gently shut as Orpheus sang a soothing lullaby, a melody evoking the tranquil repose that follows a day of devoted service. The dog's 3 fearsome mouths, which had instilled terror in innumerable departed souls, contorted into an expression akin to a faint smile. The Furies, those terrible goddesses of vengeance who perpetually pursue the guilty, suspended their eternal hunt to listen to a song imbued with themes of absolution and spiritual renewal. For the very first time in their ancient existence, they encountered a sensation distinct from their customary wrath. Even the tormented souls within the underworld found momentary respite from their relentless punishments. Tantalus, forever striving to grasp at fruit and water that ceaselessly receded from his reach, found his ceaseless cravings for sustenance and hydration momentarily vanished while absorbing Orpheus's enchanting melodies. Sisyphus, perpetually pushing his immense boulder up the mountain, interrupted his Sisyphean toil, allowing the stone to momentarily rest as he absorbed the exquisite beauty of the music. News of the living musician spread swiftly throughout the underworld. Souls congregated along Orpheus's path, drawn by music that served as a poignant reminder of every beautiful thing they had relinquished in life. The dominion of the departed had never before encountered such sublime auditory artistry. Finally, Orpheus arrived at the majestic throne chamber of Hades and Persephone, the sovereign rulers of the chthonic realm. This was the very court that Sisyphus had once outwitted with his administrative cunning and astute stratagems. These were the same formidable powers that Alcestis had approached through voluntary self-immolation. Yet Orpheus approached them through unadulterated and profound artistic articulation. Standing before the 2 imposing thrones, Orpheus commenced his paramount and most significant musical rendition. He sang about Eurydice, not merely lamenting her absence, but extolling the profound affection he harbored for her. He sang about the way she laughed at his jokes, even the most dreadful ones, about how she hummed along when he played, never quite in perfect harmony, but always with unbridled delight, about the way she perceived the world with an insatiable curiosity and boundless benevolence. But beyond that, he sang about love itself as an elemental force within the cosmos. He articulated how love engenders beauty, inspires profound growth, and intricately connects all living entities. He sang about the poignant sorrow of affection prematurely severed, and the lamentable squandering of splendor obliterated prior to its natural culmination. As he sang, an unparalleled occurrence unfolded within the throne room of the deceased. Persephone, the august queen of the underworld, began to weep. These were not lacrimal expressions of sadness, but rather tears of profound empathy and remembrance. She recalled her personal saga of devotion, her own severance from the terrestrial domain of growing things above. Even Hades, the austere deity presiding over the departed, who had observed innumerable calamities of mortal suffering, found himself profoundly moved. He had witnessed countless tragedies, but he had never heard them transmuted into such exquisite artistry. The music did not gainsay the stark actuality of demise or attempt to argue it away. Instead, it elucidated how love can forge profound significance even amidst the specter of bereavement. When the song concluded, the throne room remained shrouded in silence for a protracted moment. Then Hades spoke, his voice milder and more compassionate than it had resonated in countless millennia. "Orpheus," he declared, "your music has achieved something I would have thought impossible. You have infused aesthetic splendor into the dominion of the deceased, and in doing so you have served as a poignant reminder that mortality itself can possess a certain grandeur when it forms part of a larger narrative of love." Persephone leaned forward upon her throne. "We will return Eurydice to you," she affirmed. "Your love for her, manifested through your creative expression, has demonstrated a potency surpassing even death's dominion." Orpheus could scarcely credit the pronouncements reaching his ears. Where the wily stratagems of Sisyphus ultimately proved ineffectual, and Alcestis's sacrifice necessitated celestial intercession to achieve fruition, his music had achieved the seemingly unattainable solely through its inherent might. But then Hades raised his hand. "There is one condition," he stated, and suddenly Orpheus felt the oppressive burden of celestial restriction descending upon his hard-won victory. "Eurydice will follow you back to the world of the living, but you must not cast your gaze backward upon her until you both have completely exited our realm. If you turn to see her before you reach the surface, she will be lost to you forever." It was a stipulation simultaneously utterly logical and entirely perplexing. Why would the Olympian deities bestow this miraculous gift only to circumscribe it with such an arduous prescription? Yet Orpheus did not engage in debate. He had journeyed too far and achieved too much to jeopardize his entire endeavor by querying the divine decree. Now, the arduous ascent back towards the sunlit world commenced, imbued with elation and fervent expectation. Orpheus could distinctly hear Eurydice's footsteps trailing behind him, perceiving her ethereal presence following him up the dark, winding paths towards life. They passed every locale where his melodic enchantment had previously wrought its wonders on the downward journey. Cerberus still slumbering peacefully, the Furies remaining hushed in their contemplation, the tormented souls still enjoying respite from their labors. But as they climbed higher, drawing nearer to the crucial boundary between death and life, a gnawing uncertainty began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's consciousness. Her gentle respiration remained imperceptible to his straining ears. Her voice, too, was absent. What if the Olympian deities had, in fact, perpetrated a cruel deception? What if he was walking alone, deluding himself into believing he had been reunited with his beloved wife, when in actuality she remained ensnared within the chthonic confines below? The insidious tendrils of apprehension tightened their grip with every forward stride. He found himself exerting himself to detect even the faintest auditory confirmation that she was truly present. The soft whisper of fabric, a faint exhalation, or even the gentle sound of weeping, anything that would definitively prove he had not been deceived. Finally, just steps away from the surface, mere moments from completing the impossible journey, Orpheus's resolve fractured decisively. He abruptly pivoted to cast his gaze backward at Eurydice, needing to behold with his own eyes that she was real, that his triumph was genuine. And there she was, exquisitely lovely, imbued with sorrow, and already beginning to dissipate. As the god's condition took effect, she extended her hand to caress his visage for a final, fleeting moment, her ethereal digits traversing his flesh as though it were mere vapor. "Why?" she whispered, her voice a fading echo. And then she was gone, reclaimed by the abyssal forces, powers more formidable than even devotion or melody. Orpheus desperately tried to follow her back down, but the roots that had previously yielded passage now remained irrevocably sealed. His music, which had overcome every impediment on his initial journey, proved powerless to forge a renewed passage to the realm of the deceased. The gods had granted him one miracle, and his own human doubt had utterly destroyed it. He re-emerged into the golden embrace of the sun, utterly solitary, burdened with the profound knowledge that he had come closer than anyone to vanquishing death, and that his own inherent human weakness had snatched defeat from the very precipice of triumph. For the remainder of his earthly existence, Orpheus traversed the globe, giving voice to melodies that possessed an unparalleled aesthetic splendor and a profound, soul-rending pathos, unmatched in any era. His songs chronicled the saga of his journey to the underworld, of a love that came tantalizingly close to vanquishing the dominion of death, and of the inherent human inclination to undermine our most significant triumphs through the insidious interplay of uncertainty and apprehension. Yet perhaps the authentic victory of Orpheus did not reside in the transient rejoining with Eurydice. It lay rather in the music itself. His poignant songs about love and loss continue to resonate deeply within human hearts long after his physical departure. In a profound sense, his art achieved what his journey could not. It fashioned something aesthetically profound and enduring from the crucible of sorrow, something that touches other souls and extends solace to others confronting their own personal bereavements. What reflections do you entertain regarding Orpheus's ultimate undoing at the precipice of his greatest achievement? Was it truly a manifestation of frailty that compelled him to look back? Or was it the intrinsic essence of humanity manifesting its influence at that crucial juncture? And what profound insights does his narrative impart concerning the intricate interplay linking artistic creation, profound affection, and the most profound aspirations of the human spirit? Our extensive expedition through the various methodologies mortals have employed to challenge the dominion of death brings us finally to the most unadulterated and forthright methodology conceivable, simply overpowering death through unadulterated corporeal might and unwavering resolve. This is the characteristic approach of Heracles, the greatest hero of ancient Greece, whose direct confrontation with Thanatos represents the supreme trial of human volition pitted against an elemental cosmic power. Envision oneself amidst the undulating topography beyond Pheres' confines, where we last observed Alcestis and Admetus residing contentedly after her miraculous return from death. However, we must now revert to an earlier chronological juncture, specifically to the moment when Heracles first became aware of Alcestis's profound sacrifice, and resolved that such profound devotion ought not to remain unacknowledged or uncompensated. Heracles arrived at the stately palace of Admetus in the late afternoon, his form covered in the fine particulate matter accumulated during his arduous journey, anticipating with pleasure the customary welcome and generosity of a long-standing compatriot. He was in a temporary interlude between his divinely imposed heroic tasks, having just completed the formidable capture of the Erymanthian boar, and preparing for his next seemingly impossible assignment. These brief periods of respite between his legendary challenges were of immense and cherished value to his spirit. Times when he could almost experience a semblance of ordinary human existence, instead of feeling like a hero fated to perpetually validate his worth through an unending series of formidable trials. But upon reaching the palace, an unsettling premonition permeated the atmosphere. The customary vibrant cacophony of a flourishing royal court was conspicuously subdued. Servants moved quietly through the halls, communicating in hushed whispers. The very air hung thick with an impalpable pall of sorrow. Though Heracles could not immediately discern the cause of the distress, Admetus greeted him at the entrance, and Heracles was profoundly astonished by the altered visage of his companion. The king looked as though he had accrued the burden of several years within the span of a single month since their last encounter. His face was haggard, his ocular orbs inflamed from incessant lamentation, and his movements betrayed the profound burden of an intolerable sorrow. "My friend," Heracles inquired, his voice laced with concern, "what calamitous event has transpired here?" The burden of articulation pressed heavily upon Admetus, for how does one convey the profound truth that his beloved consort willingly surrendered her life to preserve his own? How can one adequately articulate the singular anguish that stems from surviving at the unbearable cost of another's demise? "A grievous misfortune has befallen us," Admetus eventually managed to utter, his voice laden with sorrow. "A truly devastating calamity. But I implore you, as my esteemed guest, let us direct our conversation to more agreeable subjects." In strict adherence to the venerable traditions of Hellenic hospitality, Admetus valiantly attempted to conceal his deep sorrow, striving instead to furnish appropriate diversion for his visitor. A lavish repast was meticulously prepared. Generous libations of wine were poured, and musicians performed, though their melodies resonated with a forced artificiality, devoid of any genuine gaiety. Heracles, discerning the palpable distress of his companion, yet respecting his evident desire for privacy, endeavored to alleviate the somber atmosphere by recounting tales of his most recent, perilous exploits. Yet, as is often the case, the truth, however painful, eventually found its way into the light. One of the palace attendants, deeply touched by Heracles' sincere and evident solicitude, proceeded to divulge the complete and poignant narrative of Alcestis' supreme act of devotion, how she had, without hesitation, embraced death to safeguard her husband's existence, how she had departed with the grim figure of death with a composure as unruffled as if merely embarking upon a neighborly call, and how, consequently, the entire royal household had been enveloped in an impenetrable shroud of lamentation ever since that fateful day. Upon learning the full extent of this tragic occurrence, Heracles' response was immediate and fiercely impassioned. This was not merely the sorrow typically associated with the passing of a virtuous woman. It was an incandescent fury directed at the sheer injustice of the situation. Alcestis embodied the very pinnacle of human nobility, her spirit a beacon of love, self-sacrifice, unwavering loyalty, and indomitable courage. And the notion that such an exemplary individual should be ruthlessly claimed by death, while countless individuals characterized by cruelty and avarice were permitted to enjoy protracted lives, struck Heracles as a profound and utterly unacceptable transgression against the natural order. "Where, pray tell, has she been interred?" he inquired of the servant, his voice taut with suppressed emotion. "She has not, my lord." Death himself arrived to claim her. Her corporeal form simply dissipated into nothingness as she accompanied him. There was no physical remnant left to commit to the earth. This chilling detail served only to intensify Heracles' burgeoning wrath. Not only had the Grim Reaper prematurely seized a woman of unparalleled goodness, but he had also cruelly denied her grieving family even the solace and closure afforded by proper funeral rites. It was an egregious affront, a gratuitous insult compounded upon an already unbearable tragedy. In that moment, Heracles made a momentous decision, one that would undoubtedly appear utterly beyond the realm of possibility to anyone who had not dedicated years to achieving the seemingly unachievable. He resolved to relentlessly pursue Thanatos and forcibly reclaim that which death had so unjustly appropriated. Unlike Sisyphus, who had relied upon cunning stratagems and deceptive ploys, or Orpheus, who had sought to sway the underworld with the transcendent power of his music, Heracles intended to deploy his preeminent asset, his formidable physical might, coupled with an unyielding, absolute refusal to countenance defeat. His audacious plan was nothing less than to grapple with death itself and compel it into submission. The initial hurdle proved to be the formidable task of locating Thanatos. Death, it must be understood, possesses no fixed abode, nor does he adhere to any predictable schedule of regular operating hours. He manifests wherever and whenever an individual's appointed time has arrived, only to vanish into the ethereal realms, proceeding to the next engagement on his interminable itinerary. Nevertheless, Heracles, through the arduous undertaking of his numerous labors, had cultivated an uncanny aptitude for tracking entities that actively sought to remain elusive. He meticulously followed the subtle, almost imperceptible indicators that marked death's passage through the terrestrial sphere, the inexplicable wilting of blossoms in places where no blight existed, the sudden disquietude that afflicted animals, and the cessation of birdsong. Death's presence, though unseen, left a distinctive spiritual imprint, a melancholic trace that Heracles, with his extraordinarily heightened senses, was uniquely equipped to discern. The elusive trail ultimately led him to a desolate crossroads situated just beyond the city's confines, a convergence point where several ancient pathways intersected beneath the venerable boughs of an ancient olive tree. This particular locale was renowned as one of the traditional sites where death customarily appeared to mortals whose earthly span had concluded, a liminal, neutral territory existing between the vibrant realm of the living and the enigmatic domain of whatever lay beyond. As the evening shadows lengthened and deepened, Heracles positioned himself beneath the venerable olive tree, patiently awaiting his quarry. His vigil was not protracted. As the final vestiges of daylight receded from the sky, a figure materialized from the deepening gloom, tall, shrouded in an ominous cloak, emanating the unmistakable aura of ultimate and unquestionable authority. "Thanatos," Heracles intoned, rising purposefully to his feet. "Heracles," Death responded, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed entirely unsurprised by the encounter. "I have been anticipating your arrival." "Then you are aware of the reason for my presence here. You desire me to restore Alcestis to life, but that is not the immutable mechanism by which death operates, hero. I do not relinquish that which I have claimed." "We shall see about that," Heracles declared, and with a primal roar, he launched himself with ferocious impetus at the very god of death. The ensuing confrontation was an epic struggle unlike anything ever witnessed in the annals of mortal experience. It transcended mere physical combat, though Heracles unleashed every ounce of his legendary prodigious strength. It was, at its very core, a titanic contest between the fundamental, opposing forces of life and death, enacted through the fierce clash between two beings who embodied the ultimate expression of their respective inherent powers. Thanatos engaged with the relentless, inexorable might of finality, of entropy, of the primordial force that inexorably guides all things to their ultimate conclusion. His chilling touch possessed the power to drain vitality. His very presence could inspire profound and paralyzing despair, and his eternal existence represented the inherent futility of all transient mortal striving. Yet Heracles fought with a force equally potent, the ingrained human refusal to acquiesce to the unacceptable. He epitomized not merely brute physical prowess, but the profound moral fortitude that propels individuals to confront injustice, even when confronted by seemingly insurmountable odds. His extraordinary power emanated not solely from his musculature, but from his unshakable conviction that certain principles were unequivocally worth battling for, irrespective of the dire consequences. The ferocious struggle raged throughout the entire night. They grappled fiercely beneath the ancient olive tree, their violent combat causing the very earth to tremble and the surrounding air to shimmer palpably with the colossal release of raw energy. At various junctures, Thanatos appeared to gain a decisive advantage, and Heracles could distinctly perceive his formidable strength ebbing away, his vital life force inexorably drawn towards the chilling void that death personified. But each time he teetered precariously on the precipice of utter defeat, Heracles' thoughts invariably turned to Alcestis, to her quiet, resolute courage, her unparalleled willingness to sacrifice, and her boundless affection for her family. He reflected upon Admetus's profound and desolate grief, and the inherent injustice of virtuous individuals being subjected to such profound suffering. While the indifferent cosmic order remained utterly unmoved by individual anguish, these profound meditations ignited within him a resurgence of strength that transcended mere physical capability. He was not merely contending for his own survival, nor simply seeking to validate his personal might. He was fighting for the fundamental principle that love and goodness should, indeed, hold significance within the universe, that death should not be permitted to unjustly claim the finest among humanity without a formidable challenge. As the first faint streaks of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Heracles at last gained the decisive upper hand. His grip upon Thanatos tightened relentlessly, and for the very first time in the god's eternal existence, Death found himself utterly overpowered by the sheer force of a mortal's indomitable will. "Release her," Heracles commanded, his powerful hands locked inexorably around Thanatos' throat. "I cannot," gasped Death, his voice a strained whisper. "The rules." "Then we shall shatter the rules," Heracles declared, applying even greater pressure. "Some things are far more paramount than mere regulations." And in that extraordinary moment, an event of unparalleled significance transpired. Thanatos, confronted by a mortal whose unwavering conviction proved to be more potent than the very fabric of cosmic law, made a choice that astonished both of them. He yielded. Not because he had been physically vanquished, for gods by their very nature cannot be truly annihilated by mortal strength. Rather, because Heracles had unequivocally demonstrated something that even death itself was compelled to acknowledge and respect. the unparalleled power of absolute moral commitment, the hero's audacious willingness to challenge the foundational order of existence for the profound sake of love and justice, thereby forging a unique form of authority that transcended all conventional rules. "Very well," Thanatos conceded, as Heracles finally released his grip. "But understand this implicitly. This is not to be construed as a precedent. This constitutes a singular, one-time exception, granted for an equally singular, unprecedented situation. Alcestis's sacrifice was of such unblemished purity, and your unwavering dedication to honoring it is so utterly complete, that the customary order of things must bend to acknowledge such extraordinary virtue." With a deliberate gesture that appeared to cost him considerable effort, Thanatos reached deep into the voluminous folds of his dark cloak and drew forth a figure, Alcestis, exquisitely pale and ethereally translucent, yet unmistakably alive. She gazed about her surroundings in a state of profound disorientation, as if gradually awakening from an extraordinarily vivid dream. "How?" she began to inquire, her voice faint. "Someone fought for you," Heracles explained gently, his tone imbued with a quiet reverence. "Someone determined that your selfless sacrifice deserved to be honored with an equally profound act of defiance." As the radiant sun ascended above the fateful crossroads, Heracles personally escorted Alcestis back to the city of Pherae, where her joyous reunion with Admetus swiftly became the cherished subject of enduring legend. However, the true triumph extended far beyond the mere restoration of one virtuous woman to life. It served as a powerful demonstration that unwavering moral conviction, when resolutely supported by the willingness to act upon that conviction, possesses the capacity to accomplish what might otherwise appear utterly impossible. The epic narrative of Heracles' wrestling match with death quickly disseminated throughout the whole of Greece, yet its profound meaning was interpreted distinctly by various individuals. Some perceived it as incontrovertible proof that the greatest heroes could surmount any conceivable obstacle through sheer, unyielding determination. Others interpreted it as an indication that the Olympian deities, despite their immense power, held a deep respect for mortals who exemplified the highest echelons of virtue. However, perhaps the most significant lesson gleaned from this saga is a subtler one. Heracles did not triumph over death solely through the application of superior physical might. His victory stemmed from the inherent righteousness of his cause and the absolute uncompromised nature of his commitment. He fought not for personal gain or glory, but for a profound principle. He willingly jeopardized everything, not to preserve his own life, but to honor the extraordinary sacrifice made by another. This approach stands in stark contrast to all the other methods we have observed mortals employing to challenge the dominion of death. Sisyphus relied upon his cunning intellect, but his endeavors ultimately served only his own selfish interests. Alcestis achieved a form of triumph through her ultimate sacrifice, yet she paid the most extreme price imaginable. Orpheus wielded the potent power of art, but was ultimately defeated by his own crippling doubt. Heracles, however, prevailed through the sheer force of his moral strength, the unshakable conviction that some things are undeniably worth fighting for, regardless of the daunting odds, and the unwavering willingness to transform that conviction into decisive action. His victory was not merely a personal triumph. It served to affirm the intrinsic value of virtue itself within a universe that frequently appears indifferent to the inherent worth of individual lives. As our narrative journey through these compelling tales of mortals daring to challenge the inexorable force of death draws to its conclusion, we have encountered a diverse array of approaches: cunning intellect, profound sacrifice, transcendent artistry, and unyielding moral conviction. Each of these strategies holds its own distinct place. Each has achieved remarkable feats, and each has, in its own way, confronted its inherent limitations. Yet, perhaps the ultimate lesson is not about determining which approach is definitively superior. Perhaps it speaks, instead, to the enduring human refusal to accept that anything is truly beyond reach. It is the inherent drive to persistently push against the perceived boundaries of possibility, even when failure appears to be an absolute certainty. Whether manifested through Sisyphus's intricate schemes, Alcestis's boundless love, Orpheus's enchanting music, or Heracles's formidable strength, human beings continue to defiantly challenge the very strictures of existence itself. And in a profound sense, that unyielding refusal to accept limitations, that persistent insistence on envisioning something better, something grander, something fundamentally beyond what seems achievable, might very well be the most quintessential human characteristic of all. One is prompted to consider which particular methodologies for confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges truly resonate with an individual's perspective. It also becomes highly relevant to reflect upon which specific limitations within one's personal sphere might genuinely benefit from an infusion of what has been eloquently described as mythological stubbornness, that inherent, unyielding refusal to passively accept the prevailing belief that circumstances are irrevocably fixed and unalterable. Indeed, it is frequently observed that the most profound and impactful victories do not exclusively stem from ultimately triumphing over truly impossible odds, but rather from the sheer, indomitable courage to embark upon the endeavor itself, notwithstanding the daunting nature of those very same probabilities. Fundamentally, every significant human achievement throughout history has its genesis in an individual or group possessing the unwavering will to push relentlessly against the colossal boulder of impossibility, regardless of whether that formidable obstacle immediately yielded or stubbornly resisted, momentarily rolling back